Welcome to Mechanics of Rest. Somewhere beyond the reach of every telescope, beyond the oldest light that has ever reached Earth, there may be another version of you. Not a symbol, not a dream, not a person who merely resembles you, but a version with the same face, the same memories, the same private history, and the same feeling of being the only one. And if reality is large enough, strange enough, or divided enough, that other life may not be alone, there may be versions who made the choice you avoided, versions who lost what you kept, versions who survived what you feared, and versions whose lives moved away from yours because of one microscopic difference that no human being could have noticed. Before we begin, if you enjoy these long, quiet journeys into history, science, and the stranger edges of existence, a gentle like and subscription helps Mechanics of Rest continue releasing new stories every week. And if you are listening from somewhere in the world tonight, let us know in the comments where this episode found you. You can also tell us what person, topic, story, civilization, mystery, or era you would like us to cover next. Some of the best journeys begin with a single suggestion left quietly beneath a video. For now, the question is simple, and not simple at all. If the universe is not only vast, but perhaps endless, then the first disturbing thought is not whether other worlds exist, but whether somewhere, beyond the edge of what can be seen, another version of this life has already begun. Chapter 1. The First Disturbing Thought. The first disturbing thought does not begin with another world. It begins with the smallness of the part of reality that can ever be shown to us. The universe visible from Earth is not the universe in its totality, not necessarily, but the region from which light has had time to arrive since the beginning of cosmic expansion. Every galaxy in that region, every cluster, every faint red point pulled from deep surveys, belongs to the portion of existence that has entered the history of our instruments. Beyond it, space does not have to end. It may only continue without sending anything back. That boundary is called the observable universe, and its name is easy to misunderstand. It is not a wall built around reality. It is not an edge where matter stops and nothing begins. It is a horizon of information, shaped by time, distance, expansion, and the finite speed at which light can travel. A galaxy may exist beyond that horizon and still remain forever absent from every telescope, not because it is hidden behind dust or too dim for present technology, but because its light has not had enough cosmic time to reach this place. In that sense, the first limit is not in the eye. It is in the structure of the universe itself. Modern cosmology learned this humility slowly. For much of scientific history, the visible heavens could still be mistaken for the whole. Stars seemed to fill the night with a completeness that suited the human scale. And even after telescopes widened the sky, the Milky Way could still be treated as if it were the central architecture of everything. Then distance began to grow under measurement. A small class of stars, Cepheid variables, became one of the first tools by which the scale of the universe started to loosen from ordinary imagination. Henrietta Swan Leavitt, working at the Harvard College Observatory in the early 20th century, noticed that certain variable stars in the Magellanic Clouds changed brightness in a regular way, and that their period of variation was tied to their true luminosity. The observation was quiet in form, but immense in consequence. If a Cepheid's rhythm revealed how bright the star truly was, and its apparent brightness revealed how faint it looked from Earth, then distance could be calculated. A star that seemed dim might not be weak. It might simply be very far away. Leavitt's work gave astronomy a kind of measured ladder, one that could step beyond the nearby stars and begin reaching into systems whose distances had once been nearly impossible to hold. A small timing pattern in starlight became a way to open space. Edwin Hubble later used Cepheids in the Andromeda Nebula to show that Andromeda was not a small cloud inside the Milky Way, but another galaxy altogether, far beyond the old imagined boundary of our own. The result did not merely add one more object to astronomy. It changed the size of reality. What had looked like a local mist became an island of stars. And if Andromeda was outside the Milky Way, then the Milky Way itself was no longer the universe. It was one galaxy among many, and the visible sky became not a ceiling, but a field of distances. A second change followed. The galaxies were not merely far away. Many of them were receding. Their light stretched toward the red end of the spectrum. The farther they were, the faster they seemed to be moving away. This pattern, associated with Hubble and with the theoretical work of Georges Lemaitre, became one of the central signs that the universe itself was expanding. Space was not a fixed stage on which galaxies traveled in ordinary ways. The distance between large-scale regions was increasing as the fabric of cosmic geometry changed. Expansion brings a strange correction to the mind. It is tempting to picture galaxies rushing through empty space from a central explosion, but that picture is too small and too mechanical. The better image is not motion from a middle, but distance growing everywhere at once between regions not bound together by gravity. No privileged center is required. A distant galaxy recedes not because Earth has been placed in the middle of an outward flight, but because every sufficiently distant observer would see other large-scale regions receding in much the same way. The universe expands without needing to expand into a surrounding room. Inside this expanding universe, the observable region is finite. Light from the oldest visible matter has been traveling for billions of years, and yet expansion has carried the source of that ancient light much farther away than a simple light travel calculation would suggest. The numbers themselves are less important here than the consequence. There is a region whose light can reach Earth, and beyond that region may be more space whose light cannot. The visible universe is therefore not an inventory of all that exists. It is an inventory of what has become connected to us by light. Here the first speculative door opens, and it opens without any need for fantasy. If the universe continues beyond the observable horizon, and if it continues far enough, then unseen space may contain more galaxies, more stars, more planets, and more histories. Some of those histories may be completely unlike this one. Some may differ only slightly. In the most unsettling versions of the idea, if space is not merely large but infinite, then the arrangements of matter allowed by physical law may eventually begin to repeat. Not soon, not nearby, not anywhere a ship could travel, but somewhere beyond any possible contact, the same pattern could occur again. The thought feels personal before it feels scientific. A repeated pattern would not have to begin with another face. It could begin with another planet under another star, another long chain of chemistry, another living world, another species, another family line, another body built from matter arranged in precisely the same way. If the pattern were exact enough, there could be another mind with the same memories, the same habits of thought, the same private fears, the same remembered rooms, the same unfinished wishes. From the inside, that mind would not feel like a copy. It would feel original. Nothing in established science requires this conclusion to be true. The universe may not be infinite in the needed way. Matter may not repeat as simple arguments suggest. The full structure beyond the observable horizon may be different from the part that can be measured. Yet the possibility arises from serious questions about space, scale, and infinity. It does not come from ghost stories or dream logic. It comes from taking the measurable universe seriously enough to ask whether the measurable part is only a local sample of something larger. The terror of the idea lies partly in its softness. It does not arrive like a catastrophe. It does not disturb the room, alter the body, or change the next breath. A person could live an entire life inside one observable region, while another version, if such a version exists, lives beyond every possible signal, separated not by secrecy, but by cosmic structure. No message can pass. No recognition can occur. Nothing can be shared between them. Still, the thought remains, because the absence of contact is not the same as the absence of existence. There is also a deeper unease in the word you. A perfect physical duplicate would remember being you, but this stream of awareness would not cross into that one. A distant copy could have the same childhood and the same sense of self, yet its pain would not be felt here. Its happiness would not complete anything here, and its decisions would unfold in a separate elsewhere. The duplication would be real in arrangement, but not in possession. The self, as it is lived, may depend not only on pattern, but on continuity, on the unbroken local thread by which one moment becomes the next. This is where infinity begins to change the emotional meaning of ordinary life. If there is only one version, each choice seems sealed by its singularity. If there are many versions, choice remains just as real from the inside, but it may no longer be cosmically solitary. Somewhere, under the most expansive reading of the idea, there may be a life that remained almost identical until one sentence was spoken differently. One train was missed. One illness passed. One message was answered. One person stayed. The road not taken may still be untaken here, while somewhere else it may have become the road. For now, the first disturbing thought can be left in its simplest form. The observable universe is not guaranteed to be the whole of reality, and if space extends beyond what light has shown, then existence may continue past the edge of every map. What waits there may be only more emptiness, more galaxies, more forms of matter, or regions so distant that no evidence of them can ever arrive. But if space never ends, then the question changes. The mystery is no longer only whether there is more beyond the horizon. It becomes whether endless space eventually makes room for another Earth, another history, and another life so close to this one that difference itself begins to fade. Chapter 2. If Space Never Ends. If space never ends, then the word elsewhere becomes larger than the human mind can comfortably hold. It no longer means another country, another planet, another galaxy, or even another cluster of galaxies resting beyond the Milky Way's familiar neighborhood. It begins to mean distance without final boundary, continuation without a last region, a universe whose visible part may be only one finite province inside an expanse that does not close. In such a universe, the most unsettling possibilities do not require new kinds of magic. They arise from ordinary matter, ordinary physics, and the strange pressure of endless repetition. The observable universe may already feel too large for imagination. Its galaxies are not arranged like decorations around Earth, but spread across a cosmic web of filaments, clusters, sheets, and enormous voids, with light crossing distances so great that seeing far away also means seeing long ago. Yet even this enormous region may be only a sample. The horizon around it is not a border where reality stops, but the point beyond which light has not reached this location. If the same kind of space continues past that limit, then there may be more stars and galaxies beyond the boundary of sight, not in a supernatural realm, but in a physical continuation that remains unreachable. At first, this seems only like more of the same. More galaxies, more darkness between them, more stars forming and fading, more planets orbiting in ordinary silence. But endlessness changes the meaning of more. A very large universe can contain unfamiliar things. An infinite universe may have room, not only for unfamiliar things, but for repeated things. Given enough space, and given physical laws that arrange matter in limited ways within any finite region, patterns that once seemed singular may appear again. The point is delicate because it can be overstated too easily. No telescope has seen another Earth beyond the observable horizon. No instrument has found another version of a human being living in a duplicated room under a duplicated sky. The idea is not a discovery. It is a consequence some thinkers have drawn from the possibility of infinite space, finite arrangements, and ordinary probability. If a finite volume can only contain matter in a finite number of possible arrangements, and if there are infinitely many such volumes, then, under certain assumptions, arrangements would eventually recur. In that thought, a galaxy like the Milky Way may not be absolutely unique. A star like the Sun may appear again. A planet with the same mass, the same oceans, the same continents, the same storms and migrations and buried fossils may exist so far away that no signal from it could ever arrive here. The repetition would not need to be near. It would not even need to be reachable in principle. It would only need space to be vast enough, or endless enough, for the same physical pattern to be written again. From there, the thought grows closer. Another Earth is already difficult to sit with, but another Earth alone is still a distant astronomical object. The more personal possibility begins when the pattern does not stop at mountains, oceans, buildings, and weather. It continues into biology, into families, into generations, into the physical details of one body and one brain. Every remembered face would be rebuilt by arrangement. Every old conversation would exist as a structure of memory. Every habit of thought, every private association, every fear carried for years without being spoken, would be present because the matter was arranged in the same way. If such a duplicate existed, it would not feel duplicated from inside. That is one of the softest and strangest parts of the idea. A copied mind, if truly copied down to the physical arrangement that carries memory and awareness, would wake into itself with the same certainty that this life has. It would not look around and feel like a replacement. It would not experience itself as secondary. It would remember childhood as its own childhood, grief as its own grief, hope as its own hope, and the present moment as the one point from which all reality seems to be viewed. The word copy becomes misleading here because it carries a human order of first and second. A document is written once and copied later. A portrait has an original and a reproduction. But in an infinite physical universe, two identical regions would not necessarily stand in that familiar relationship. One would not have to know about the other. One would not have to come after the other. They could be two equally local arrangements, each original to itself, each sealed inside its own horizon, each unable to prove or disprove the other by any direct exchange of light. Still, the unease remains. If another version has the same body and memory, is that version actually the same person, or only a perfect stranger made of the same pattern? The answer depends on what the self is taken to be. If the self is only physical structure, then a perfect duplicate has a powerful claim to sameness. If the self is continuity, the unbroken passage from one moment of awareness to the next, then the duplicate is not this stream of experience. It may be a real self. It may be almost unimaginably close, but its awareness would not be available here. This distinction matters because infinity can make personal identity feel unstable. The distant duplicate may remember the same mistakes, but its regret does not relieve this regret. It may remember the same love, but its love does not complete anything in this life. It may have the same name, the same voice, the same inner weather, and yet it remains elsewhere in a sense more absolute than ordinary distance. No bridge crosses between the two streams. No thought passes from one into the other. Sameness of pattern does not create shared consciousness. And then there are the near duplicates. Infinite space, if it permits exact repetition, would also permit almost repetition. There may be versions whose lives match this one until yesterday, until childhood, until one meeting, one accident, one sentence, one delay at a door. The difference may begin smaller than memory. A single atom arranged differently would not change a biography at first. A tiny physical variation could remain hidden for years before the chain of consequences widened. Eventually, one life might turn left while another turned right. One person might answer while another stayed silent. One future might open while another faded. This is where the speculation begins to touch regret. Human beings already live beside unlived lives. Every choice leaves behind the image of another possible road, and most of the time those roads remain private inventions of memory and imagination. In an infinite cosmos, the road not taken may acquire a different texture. It may not be merely imagined. It may be physically realized somewhere, not because desire made it real, but because enough space gave every allowed arrangement room to occur. The life that did not happen here may have happened elsewhere, under a sky that could never send news of it back. There is no comfort that automatically follows from this. A better version living somewhere beyond the horizon would not rescue this version from pain. A happier version would not transfer its happiness across the cosmic distance. A wiser version would not repair a foolish choice here. The separation is complete enough that each life remains responsible to its own moments. Still, the thought alters the shape of loneliness. It suggests that some events that feel singular may be singular only locally, and that the universe, if endless, may contain not one biography, but a vast field of biographies differing by degrees too small to count. Some versions, in this speculative picture, may be nearly indistinguishable. Others may drift farther and farther from recognition. A person may exist in one region with the same childhood, but a different old age. In another, the same face may belong to a life shaped by a different country, a different illness, a different friendship, a different loss. Farther out, resemblance may weaken until only a few features remain. Farther still, even those features vanish, and the universe contains not another self, but merely another arrangement among the endless possible arrangements of matter. The mind tends to search for the most dramatic version of the idea, but the quieter version may be more difficult. It is not that somewhere there is one opposite life, perfectly designed to answer this one. It is that, if the assumptions are true, there may be an uncountable spread of lives, each separated by slight physical difference. each real to itself, each unaware of the rest. No single alternate life carries the meaning of this one. Instead, meaning becomes local again, not because the larger possibility is false, but because awareness remains attached to its own thread. The scientific uncertainty remains important. Space may be finite in a way not yet visible. The repeated arrangement argument may not apply as neatly as it seems. The true structure of reality beyond the horizon may be inaccessible forever. But speculation does not need certainty in order to disturb the imagination. It only needs a possible door left open by serious ideas. Infinite space, if it exists, is such a door. It allows the thought that somewhere beyond the oldest reachable light, matter may have arranged itself into another world, another history, and another mind that would say I with the same quiet certainty. So Chapter 2 leaves the universe larger than Chapter 1 found it. The first disturbing thought was that the observable universe may not be all there is. The second is that if space continues without end, then continuation may not remain simple. It may become repetition. It may become variation. It may become a distance so vast that somewhere beyond every possible message, another version of a life has opened its eyes inside the same pattern and believed, just as naturally, that it was the only one. And once endless space has made room for copies, the next question is softer and more personal. What happens to the life that almost happened? The life that differed by only one choice, one delay, or one word? Chapter 3. The other life that almost happened. The other life that almost happened begins closer than the edge of the universe. It begins in memory, in the ordinary human habit of looking backward and finding a place where the path divided. A person does not need cosmology to know the feeling. There was a message that might have been sent, a door that might have been opened, a journey that might have been taken, a silence that might have been broken before it became permanent. The mind keeps such moments because they feel like hinges, small places where the weight of a whole life may have turned. In an ordinary view of reality, those other lives remain unreal. They belong to imagination, regret, hope, fear, and the private theatre of the mind. The life that happened is solid, and the life that did not happen becomes a shadow around it, present only because the mind can compare one path with another. Yet an infinite or near-infinite cosmos changes the emotional pressure of that thought. If every physically possible arrangement of matter is given enough room somewhere, then the life that did not happen here may not be only a mental ghost. It may be a real history, unfolding beyond every possible signal. This is speculation, and it must remain speculation. No one has found the universe where a particular decision went differently. No measurement has located the world where one person stayed in a city, answered a call, avoided an accident, or chose a different name for a child. The possibilities are not evidence, but the idea of endless space makes a strange permission. It allows the question to be asked without leaving the language of matter and law. If physical reality is large enough, and if the laws of nature permit enough variation, then somewhere there may be a version of a life that matches this one until one detail quietly changes. The difference need not begin with a grand decision. Human beings like to imagine their lives turning on visible scenes, because visible scenes are easier to remember. A conversation, an exam, an illness, a train, a meeting, a refusal, a yes or a no. But physical reality does not begin its differences at the scale of meaning. It begins with arrangements of particles, fluctuations, delays, small imbalances, tiny changes in timing that may remain invisible for years. A world that differs from this one by the placement of one particle would not at once become a different biography. It may carry the same childhood, the same streets, the same weather, the same ordinary morning, until the difference spreads into something larger. A life can be changed by a delay of seconds. A person arrives late and misses a meeting. A call is not answered because the phone is in another room. A thought forms slightly later, and the sentence that might have repaired a friendship never appears. In one history, the moment passes without consequence. In another, the same delay becomes the first small stone in a line of events that years later has changed a home, a career, a grief, or a marriage. The universe does not need to announce such turns. It lets them settle into the chain of cause and effect. Near duplicates are therefore more intimate than perfect copies. An exact duplicate is strange because it challenges uniqueness, but a near duplicate is strange because it challenges regret. It carries the feeling that somewhere the almost life may have become an actual life, not a symbolic lesson, not a fantasy arranged to comfort the present, but a physical history in which matter, circumstance, and chance took the slightly different path. The other version did not have to know it was the other version. From inside that life, this one would be the ghost. There may be a version who spoke earlier. There may be a version who waited longer. There may be a version who never met the person whose arrival changed the entire shape of memory. There may be one who made the cautious choice and one who made the reckless one who lived near the sea and one who never left the inland streets of childhood, one who recovered from the same sorrow quickly and one who carried it for decades. In this kind of speculation, the universe becomes a vast archive of possible biographies, not written in ink, but assembled in stars, planets, bodies, and the slow chemistry of minds. The thought can sound comforting for a moment. It seems to restore what was lost. If every road exists somewhere, then perhaps nothing is entirely missing, but the comfort is unstable. Another version's fulfilled life does not repair this version's absence. A life where the message was sent does not change the silence here. A life where the person lived does not restore the person who died in this branch of experience. The possible reality of other histories does not make this history less real, and it does not soften consequence by sending compensation across unreachable space. That is why the idea remains both beautiful and severe. It expands the field of existence while leaving each stream of awareness alone inside itself. A version elsewhere may have everything this life lacks, but it cannot lend anything back. Its joy remains local. Its sorrow remains local. Its wisdom, if it arrived through different mistakes, cannot cross the horizon and become knowledge here. The separation is not emotional first. It is physical. No signal, no shared nervous system, no continuity of experience joins the two lives. The word almost carries special weight because human memory already arranges itself around almost events. A person can remember the interview almost passed, the apology almost made, the journey almost taken, the illness almost avoided, the friendship almost saved. These moments remain bright not because they were larger than other events, but because the mind can still sense the nearby branch that did not become its own. They are close enough to be imagined clearly. In a speculative multiverse, such imagined nearness may correspond to actual variation somewhere beyond reach. Still, there is no reason to believe that the universe respects human importance when it makes variations. It would not select only the meaningful roads. It would not arrange alternate worlds around the emotional needs of one life. There may be versions that differ by one dust grain and never diverge in any humanly noticeable way. There may be versions where the difference becomes visible only after centuries, long after every person now living has disappeared. There may be versions where the change is enormous, but irrelevant to any human story. Endless variation would be indifferent, not narrative. This indifference is important because it keeps the speculation from becoming fantasy. The multiverse, if it exists, would not be a library curated for regret. It would not store better endings for the sake of those who wanted them. It would not hold darker endings as punishment or kinder endings as reward. It would be a physical consequence of scale, law, chance, and arrangement. The other life would not exist for this one. It would simply exist, if the assumptions are right, as locally and completely as this one does. Yet even without purpose, the possibility changes how a life can be thought about. The self begins to appear less like a single object placed once in the universe, and more like one realized path among many physically permitted paths. This does not make the path less precious. In some ways, it makes it more precise. Out of all the near lives that may have happened elsewhere, this is the one whose continuity is actually being lived here. Its particular sequence of accidents, choices, delays, recoveries, and losses is not interchangeable from the inside. A person may imagine another version who avoided the great mistake, but that version, if real, would have inherited different burdens. It may have avoided one regret only to meet another. It may have gained one happiness and lost a different tenderness. It may have become less wounded and less wise, safer and less open, more successful and more alone. The human mind tends to simplify alternate lives into single corrections, but a complete life cannot be corrected at only one point. Change one thread, and the pattern does not improve in isolation. It becomes another pattern. This is why the other life that almost happened is not necessarily a happier life. It is only another life. The version who left may spend years imagining the one who stayed. The version who stayed may dream of the one who left. The version who spoke may regret speaking. The version who remained silent may regret silence. In a sufficiently vast reality, every correction may have its own wound, every escape its own cost, every rescue its own later loss. Multiplicity does not turn existence into justice. It only makes existence larger. The thought returns, then, to the quiet fact of separation. If the other life exists, it cannot be visited. If it is flourishing, it cannot report back. If it is suffering, it cannot be comforted from here. Its distance may be so great that the word distance almost fails, because the separation is not merely across space, but across causal possibility. It may belong to a region beyond the observable horizon, or to a branch that no longer shares interference with this one, or to a structure of reality that science has not yet learned how to describe. Whatever the model, the lived result is the same. Each version wakes inside its own present. The other life that almost happened, therefore, does not erase this life. It surrounds it with possibility. It makes every ordinary moment feel locally chosen, locally accidental, locally fragile. A cup placed on one side of a table rather than another. A road crossed a few seconds later. A name remembered or forgotten. A sentence softened before it leaves the mouth. Each of these may seem small, but smallness is not the same as weakness in a universe of chains. A microscopic difference can remain quiet for a long time and then become the beginning of a different world. By the end of this thought, the multiverse has moved from the edge of space into the private architecture of a biography. The idea no longer belongs only to distant galaxies or repeated arrangements of matter. It has entered the softer territory of choice, delay, memory, and the lives that seem to remain near the one that actually unfolded. Yet endless space is only one way for reality to become multiple. There is another possibility, colder and larger, in which entire regions of existence may separate from one another before they can ever share a common history, sealed away not by decision or distance alone, but by the expansion of space itself. Chapter 4. Bubble Universes and Separated Realities. Endless space is one way for reality to become multiple, but it is not the only one. Another possibility begins much earlier, before stars, before galaxies, before planets, before the universe had cooled enough for atoms to hold together. It begins in the first fractions of cosmic time, when space itself may have behaved in a way that no human environment can imitate. In this picture, the universe did not merely expand. For an extremely brief interval, it expanded with a speed and intensity that stretched tiny regions beyond contact, smoothing them, enlarging them, and preparing the conditions from which ordinary cosmic history could later unfold. The idea is known as inflation, and in its careful scientific form, it was developed to answer problems in early cosmology. The visible universe is strangely uniform on large scales. Regions of the cosmic microwave background, lying in opposite directions of the sky, have nearly the same temperature, even though, without inflation, they appear too far apart to have exchanged heat or information in the usual way. The geometry of the observable universe also appears very close to flat. Inflation gave physicists a way to explain these features by proposing that a tiny early region was stretched enormously, so that irregularities were diluted and distant parts of the visible universe once came from a much smaller connected state. Alan Gough's early version of inflation, proposed around 1980, was not designed as a doorway into countless universes. It was a solution to difficulties inside one universe. Yet theories sometimes carry consequences larger than their first purpose. If inflation happened because a field held space in a high-energy state, then the end of inflation may not have occurred everywhere in the same way at the same time. In some regions, the field could settle. Energy could become particles and radiation, and a hot, expanding universe like ours could begin. Elsewhere, the inflating state might continue. That continuation is where the speculative picture opens. If inflation stops in one region but continues around it, then that stopped region may become something like a bubble universe. The phrase is useful but imperfect. These are not soap bubbles floating through a pre-existing room. They are regions where inflation has ended, enclosed not by a material wall, but by the structure of expanding space-time itself. Inside such a region, physics may cool, matter may form, and cosmic history may proceed. Outside it, inflation may still be carrying other regions away into separation so extreme that no signal can cross from one finished domain into another. Andre Linde's work on chaotic inflation and eternal inflation helped give this idea a wider form. In some versions, inflation is not only an event in the past, but a process that continues in the larger background, ending locally again and again. One region settles into a universe. Another does the same elsewhere. Between them, expanding space prevents contact. The result is not a single cosmic beginning followed by one continuous history, but a larger structure in which many histories may begin, each sealed inside its own conditions, each unable to look out and see the others. The separation is more complete than distance in ordinary life. A distant island can be reached by a boat. A distant planet might be reached in principle by a long enough journey. A distant galaxy can at least send light, if expansion has not carried it beyond communication. But a bubble universe, in this speculative picture, does not sit somewhere waiting for travel. It belongs to a region of space-time whose relation to this one may make travel meaningless. The barrier is not a locked gate. It is the fact that the histories have become causally unavailable to one another. This gives the multiverse a different texture from infinite repetition in endless space. Another version of a life may exist because matter eventually arranges itself again. In eternal inflation, another universe may exist because the process that made this cosmic region may have occurred many times, producing separated domains beyond contact. Some of those domains might resemble ours, others might not. They're stars, particles, constants, dimensions, or histories could differ depending on the deeper physics governing the inflating field and its possible ways of settling. The word universe begins to carry less certainty than it once did. If one of these regions had laws close enough to ours, it might produce galaxies, stars, planets, chemistry, and perhaps living minds. If it differed only slightly, it might contain forms of structure that would be recognizable in broad outline but strange in detail. Its stars might burn with altered lifetimes. Its matter might gather differently. Its galaxies might form earlier or later, or with different patterns of clustering. In a speculative multiverse, the familiar world is no longer the default shape of reality, but one local outcome among many possible settlements of physical law. If another region differed more strongly, it might never allow atoms as we know them. Matter might remain too unstable for chemistry. Gravity might gather structure too quickly or too weakly. The balance between expansion and attraction might prevent long-lived stars from forming at all. A universe can be physically real and still be barren of every form of life the human mind would recognize. Multiplicity does not mean that every universe is rich, gentle, or habitable. It may mean that most regions are silent in deeper ways, not because they are empty, but because their laws do not permit the slow complexity from which observers arise. For the question of infinite selves, bubble universes create both possibility and distance. A bubble sufficiently similar to ours could, in principle, contain a world like Earth. A still more similar region might contain a history close to human history. Farther along the speculation, if there are enough regions and enough variation, some could contain versions of the same person, though this depends on assumptions stacked upon assumptions. The idea is not proven by inflation. It is not required by every inflationary model. But eternal inflation makes the imagination face a larger kind of multiplicity, one in which whole cosmic domains may be born beyond each other's reach. In that picture, another version of a life would be separated, not merely by unimaginable distance, but by the fact that its entire universe may have cooled out of inflation somewhere else in the larger structure. It would not share the same sky. It might not share the same galaxies. It might not even share exactly the same physical constants. If it resembled this life closely enough to count as another version, that resemblance would be almost more unsettling, because it would have arisen across a separation deeper than any ordinary remoteness. Two similar lives could unfold without ever belonging to the same cosmic address. The image can tempt the mind into false closeness. Words like bubble and neighboring universe make it sound as though other realities are nearby, pressed gently against this one, perhaps reachable through some hidden passage. The scientific picture is colder. If such domains exist, they are not secret rooms behind the visible universe. They are not places awaiting a more powerful engine. Their separation may be built into the expansion that formed them. They could be real without being accessible, present in the larger structure of reality without being present in any way that matters to travel, communication, or shared history. This is what makes the idea so quietly severe. A person may imagine another universe where life took a kinder turn, but if that universe belongs to a separate inflationary region, it is not merely far away. It is sealed into its own cosmic inheritance. Its time, matter, radiation, and structure belong to a different aftermath. Even if a mind there remembered the same childhood, even if its inner life resembled this one with impossible closeness, there would be no path between the two. The other self would not be waiting beyond the dark. It would be contained inside a reality whose distance is written into the origin of space-time. Yet the thought also enlarges the meaning of beginning. In the older picture, the universe begins, expands, forms matter, forms stars, and eventually produces the rare local conditions in which life becomes possible. In the inflationary multiverse picture, beginnings may be many. A beginning can happen inside a wider process that continues elsewhere. What looks like the origin from inside one region may be only a local cooling, a local settling, a local release from an inflating state that has not ended everywhere. The word beginning becomes regional rather than absolute. There is a strange humility in that. The universe visible from Earth may contain hundreds of billions of galaxies, and still it may be only one cool domain among others. The cosmic microwave background may be the oldest light available here, and still it may record only the early surface of this region, not the whole of reality. The laws measured in laboratories may describe this universe with precision and still leave open the possibility that other regions settled into different values. Measurement remains powerful, but it becomes local in a grander sense. Speculation, when held carefully, does not reduce the value of measurement. It gives measurement a boundary. The known universe becomes a region that can be studied with extraordinary care, while the possible larger structure remains partly hidden by the very conditions that make it larger. That is why eternal inflation is so difficult to treat in a simple way. It belongs to serious theoretical physics, but its most dramatic consequences may lie beyond direct confirmation. It can suggest separated universes without handing science a clean window into them. Still, the possibility lingers because it changes the scale of the question. The issue is no longer only whether endless space might eventually repeat a person. It is whether the process that gave rise to a universe like this one may have given rise to many regions, each with its own history, its own conditions, its own chance at matter and mind. Some may be nearly empty, some may be fertile, some may be so unlike this universe that language begins to fail before the thought is complete. And if reality contains such regions, then the versions of existence that resemble this one would be only a small portion of a much larger field. The unsettling part is not only that there may be other universes, it is that many of them may have no place for anything like a human life at all. Multiplicity does not guarantee familiarity. It may produce difference more often than repetition, silence more often than consciousness, unstable matter more often than worlds. Before the thought can return to other versions of the self, it has to pass through the colder possibility that most realities, if they exist, would never allow the self to appear. The multiverse may contain copies, branches, and near lives, but it may also contain vast regions where no memory forms, no choice is made, and no one ever wakes to ask whether another version exists. Chapter 5. universes where you could never exist. Not every universe, if many universes exist, would be a place where a life could begin. The mind naturally reaches for other Earths, other homes, other versions of familiar people moving through altered histories. But this may be the most human distortion of the multiverse idea. A larger reality would not be required to favor recognition. It would not need to repeat the conditions that made this world possible. It might contain regions where the basic ingredients of matter behave differently, where stars cannot hold themselves in long balance, where atoms never gather into the patient structures from which chemistry becomes life. The possibility begins with constants. In this universe, gravity has a certain strength. The electromagnetic force has a certain relation to matter and light. The masses of particles fall into certain ranges. The behavior of nuclear forces allows some atomic nuclei to hold together while others decay. These facts can sound dry when listed, but together they form the quiet permission behind everything familiar. They allow hydrogen to exist, stars to burn, carbon to form, planets to cool, water to flow, and living cells to build their long, delicate habits from atoms arranged in ordered ways. If one of those values were different, the difference might not produce a universe that looks almost like this one, with a few altered details. It might produce no lasting structure at all. A stronger gravity could draw matter into dense clumps too quickly, shortening the time available for stable stars and slow planetary development. A weaker gravity might leave matter too dispersed, unable to gather into the deep furnaces where heavier elements are made. If the balance inside atomic nuclei changed, carbon might be rarer, or oxygen might form differently, or chemistry might lose some of the flexibility that living systems require. The change does not have to be large in order to matter. This is where the speculation grows colder. A multiverse filled with different physical laws would not be a gallery of alternate human stories. It would be a wider field of possible physics, and many of those possibilities may never grow warm enough, complex enough, or stable enough to contain an observer. Some regions might expand too quickly for matter to gather. Others might collapse before any long history can unfold. In some, particles may exist but never combine into atoms. In others, atoms may exist, but stars may never live long enough to build the heavier elements that planets and bodies require. There is no sorrow inside such a universe, because there is no one there to feel its absence. That is part of the difficulty. A barren universe is not tragic to itself. It does not know that it lacks oceans, forests, memory, language, or a face turned toward the sky. It simply follows its own laws. Its emptiness is not failure. It is only the consequence of conditions that do not permit the slow climb from matter to awareness. The human mind, however, cannot help measuring these possibilities against the one region it knows. Here, stars formed from collapsing clouds of gas. Some stars lived and ended in ways that seeded space with heavier elements. Later generations of stars gathered planets around them, and on at least one planet, chemistry settled into cells, cells into organisms, organisms into nervous systems, and nervous systems into minds capable of asking why the laws allowed any of it. Every ordinary thought depends on an enormous background of physical permission. The fact that a person can wonder about other universes already means they inhabit a universe with the right kind of patience. This does not mean the universe was made for thought. It means thought can only appear in places where the conditions permit it. Brandon Carter's anthropic reasoning gave physics a way to speak about this without turning it into a mystical claim. Observers can only observe regions compatible with observers. That may sound simple, almost circular, but it becomes important in a multiverse. If many regions exist with many different conditions, then it is not surprising that any conscious question arises from a rare region where consciousness can arise at all. The question is not why this place is typical. It may not be typical. The question is why it is livable enough to be noticed from within. In a speculative landscape of many universes, the regions without observers would vastly outnumber the regions with minds, depending on how the larger theory is shaped. There may be universes where matter remains thin and uneventful for ages, never gathering into stars. There may be universes where the first structures form, but their fires end too quickly. There may be universes where chemistry has fewer pathways, where molecules remain simple, where no long chain of inheritance ever begins. The silence of such regions would not be like a quiet room waiting to be entered. It would be a silence without rooms, without waiting, without the possibility of anyone arriving. Against that background, a universe that permits a human life becomes more strange, not because it is necessarily unique, but because it sits inside a narrow set of conditions. The existence of an observer requires more than space. It requires time, stability, matter of the right kinds, stars of the right lifetimes, planetary surfaces capable of long change, chemistry rich enough to store information, and environments steady enough for that information to be copied, altered, and selected. A self is not a simple object placed into reality. It is the late result of many permissions layered across cosmic history. The idea of infinite versions must pass through this filter. If other universes exist, most may not contain another version of any person. Many may not contain persons at all. Some may not contain planets. Some may not contain atoms stable enough for bodies. Some may not contain long-lived stars. The multiverse may be lavish in number and still severe in hospitality. It may produce countless regions, but only a smaller portion may ever become places where memory can form. This makes the possible existence of other selves more precise. A copy of a person cannot appear just anywhere in a multiverse. It requires a region whose laws allow matter to organize in nearly the same way, whose history produces the right stars, the right elements, the right planet, the right biological inheritance, the right chain of ancestors, the right accidents of birth and survival. The other self is not the default outcome of multiplicity. It is a highly specific arrangement inside a larger field of arrangements that may usually produce nothing like it. And yet, if the number of regions is large enough, even rarity may not prevent repetition. This is one of the strange turns of infinity. A condition can be unlikely and still occur many times if the field of trials has no final edge. A habitable universe may be rare. A human-like species may be rarer. A life matching another life in detail may be rarer still. But rarity changes its meaning when the count of possible regions becomes vast beyond measure. The impossible remains impossible. The physically allowed, however unlikely, begins to return as a question. The word allowed matters. A multiverse does not mean that every fantasy becomes real. It does not mean that contradictions become possible, or that any imagined story exists somewhere by the mere act of being imagined. Physical law still governs what can happen inside any region. Even if different regions have different laws, each region would still have its own constraints. A universe where stable matter cannot form will not contain a human biography. A universe without the necessary chemistry will not produce memory as human beings know it. Speculation becomes meaningful only when it remains tied to what the laws permit. This is why universes without us are not a side note. It protects the idea from becoming childish. Without them, the multiverse too easily becomes a wish-making machine, a place where every regret is repaired and every fantasy receives a physical address. A serious, speculative multiverse is not so obedient. It contains failure before it contains familiarity. It contains sterile regions, unstable histories, empty outcomes, and physical arrangements with no doorway into life. Only after passing through all of that does it begin to ask whether some regions might also resemble this one closely enough for another version of a life to appear. The thought can be humbling in a way that is difficult to name. A person may feel ordinary inside their own day, surrounded by small obligations, minor irritations, repeated rooms, and familiar routines. But the existence of that ordinary day depends on a universe whose laws held together across billions of years, whose stars made the elements of bodies, whose planet remained stable enough for life to continue, and whose history delivered one conscious stream into one particular present. Ordinary experience is built on an arrangement that may be rare across the wider range of possible realities. If other universes exist where no one could ever wake, then consciousness becomes not the center of reality, but one of its delicate local outcomes. It is not guaranteed by existence itself. It is not promised wherever space and time appear. It requires conditions that may fail in countless ways. In many possible regions, there may be no eyes, no memory, no hunger, no language, no fear of death, no longing for another path, no question of infinite selves. The universe may be real there, but reality would not know itself. This changes the emotional shape of the larger speculation. The first fear was duplication, that somewhere another version might exist. The colder thought is absence, that across most of reality, nothing like the self may ever be possible. Between these two extremes lies the narrow band of habitable possibility, where matter lasts long enough, stars burn gently enough, chemistry becomes rich enough, and memory finds a body through which to continue. If another version of a person exists anywhere, it must belong to such a band. It must arise from a universe generous enough to permit fragility. The multiverse, then, may be less like an endless crowd of selves and more like an immense field of conditions, most of them unable to notice themselves. Somewhere inside that field, certain regions may become fertile. Inside some of those, planets may settle into long seasons. Inside some of those, life may begin, endure, change, and become aware. Only then can the question of other versions return. Only then can reality produce not merely matter, but choice, memory, regret, and the strange private feeling that one life could have gone another way. Once the barren possibilities have been allowed their place, the familiar question returns with a sharper edge. A universe capable of forming a self is already a selective thing, a narrow opening in a wider darkness of physical alternatives. If such openings occur more than once, and if some of them resemble this one closely enough, then the idea of another life no longer floats freely in fantasy. It gathers around a more exact possibility, a region where the laws are kind enough for stars, planets, bodies, and minds, and where one small difference in circumstance might allow a familiar life to turn in another direction. Chapter 6. The universe where you made the other choice. The universe where the other choice was made begins with a feeling that nearly everyone knows, though no instrument can measure it directly. It is the soft pressure of a life that did not happen. A path appears in memory, not as a completed road, but as a trace beside the road that was taken. There was a place where one answer could have been different, where one departure could have been delayed, where one confession could have been spoken, where one refusal could have softened before it became permanent. Most of the time, such possibilities remain inside thought, held by the mind because the mind is built to compare what happened with what might have happened. Physics does not usually care about the emotional shape of choice. It speaks in fields, particles, forces, probabilities, and histories of matter. Yet the question of choice becomes strange when the universe is allowed to become very large, or when reality is allowed to branch, or when physical possibility is given enough room to unfold in more than one way. The life not lived may no longer belong only to regret or imagination. Under certain speculative pictures, it may belong to another physical history, somewhere beyond sight, or beyond contact, or beyond the single line of experience that consciousness calls its own. It is important to move carefully here. A human decision does not need to be imagined as a magical lever that creates a new universe every time a person hesitates. That is the popular picture, and it is too simple. The more serious possibility is subtler. Reality may contain many histories because the physical world itself contains variation, uncertainty, branching, or repetition. Human choice then appears inside that larger physical process, not above it. A decision may feel personal from the inside, but it is also carried by neurons, chemistry, memory, timing, sensation, and the countless small conditions that surround a body at the moment it acts. A person may say yes in one life and no in another, but that difference has roots. The body may be more tired by a small amount. The room may be warmer. A remembered sentence may rise slightly earlier in the mind. A friend may send a message 1 minute sooner. A bus may arrive before the rain begins. A tiny alteration in the chain can change what seems later like a free and deliberate turn. The decision remains meaningful because it belongs to the person who makes it. Still, beneath its meaning lies a deep physical ancestry. In a universe of alternate histories, the other choice may not be stored as an abstract possibility. It may be carried by another version of events, somewhere, under the speculative assumptions of infinite space. There may be a world where the same person reached the same evening with the same memories and then answered differently. The same hands, the same tiredness, the same private arguments within the mind, all arranged almost exactly as here, until the final balance tipped the other way. The difference may have been small enough to pass unnoticed at first, yet large enough to redirect years. A life can turn on a sentence. One version says what has been held back for too long, and afterward a relationship changes its shape. Another version remains silent, and the silence becomes part of the structure of the years that follow. In one history, the words repair something that was nearly lost. In another, they arrive badly and make the wound sharper. In a third, the same words are never spoken, and the relationship does not end suddenly, but thins gradually, like a path used less often until grass settles over it. The choice is one moment, but the life that grows from it is never only one moment. The universe where the other choice was made is therefore not a simple correction of this one. It is tempting to imagine that the alternate life contains exactly what this life lacks. The mischance is taken. The lost person is kept. The risk succeeds. The wound never opens. But a life is not a single event removed from its consequences. Every change carries other changes behind it. The person who stayed may lose what the person who left gained. The person who spoke may bear the cost of honesty. The person who remained safe may never discover the strength that came from danger. No alternate path is pure rescue. This is one reason the speculation remains adult rather than childish. It does not offer a perfect life somewhere else. It offers a different life. The version who chose ambition may have lost tenderness. The version who chose tenderness may have carried financial fear. The version who forgave may have remained near harm. The version who refused may have lived with distance. The version who became known may have lost privacy. The version who stayed unknown may have kept peace and wondered what was wasted. Every life solves some problems by accepting others. If infinite space allows near duplicates, then every familiar regret may have neighbors. There may be a version who passed the exam that was failed here, but also inherited the pressure that came afterward. A version who accepted the invitation and entered a friendship that later became heavy. A version who missed the accident and met some other sorrow years later. A version who chose the easier path and slowly became someone who wondered why ease had not become happiness. The multiverse, if it contains such lives, does not arrange them into a moral order. It lets them unfold according to their own chains. The idea can be unsettling because it weakens the finality of imagination while preserving the finality of experience. From the outside, if there were an outside broad enough to hold all versions, many paths may exist. From inside one life, only one path is continuous. The other version may be real to itself, but it does not become memory here. Its years do not deposit wisdom into this nervous system. Its grief does not reduce the weight of this grief. Its happiness does not arrive as warmth in this body. The branching of possibility does not merge the streams that follow. And yet the mind may still feel touched by the thought. The life that took the other road becomes more than an idle mental exercise. It becomes a possible neighbor of the self, not near in space, but near in structure. It begins with almost the same person, almost the same circumstances, almost the same remembered past. The difference lies in the turning. A version chooses departure. A version chooses patience. A version chooses the apology. A version chooses pride. A version turns toward a person. A version lets them pass into the long, unvisited distance of memory. When ordinary regret imagines such lives, it often stops at the first improved scene. The apology is accepted. The risk succeeds. The missed opportunity is restored. But a full alternate history must continue past the scene that imagination prefers. Morning comes after the repaired conversation. Months follow the accepted offer. Age enters the successful life as surely as it enters the failed one. The alternate self must still eat, sleep, misunderstand, recover, forget, and lose. Its world does not freeze at the moment of correction. It continues until it becomes as complicated as this one. There may also be versions where the other choice made everything worse. This thought is less attractive, but just as necessary. A door that seems regretted from here may have been a protection. A silence that feels cowardly may have prevented a deeper rupture. A delay that seemed like failure may have kept the body away from danger. A rejection may have moved a life away from a future it could not yet recognize as harmful. Human memory is not always a reliable judge of the roads it did not walk. It can polish the unchosen path until it shines with a false gentleness. A speculative multiverse does not settle these uncertainties. It multiplies them. If many versions exist, then some choices improved a life and others damaged it. Some losses were avoided, and other losses arrived in their place. Some versions became kinder through an altered path, Others became narrower. Some gained what this life wanted and discovered that wanting had misunderstood the thing it desired. The existence of many outcomes would not reveal which one was best. It would only show that reality, if large enough, may contain more answers than one life can test. There is a quiet severity in that. A person must still live as if this path matters, because this is the only path available to this stream of awareness. Even if another version chose differently, this version remains inside its own consequences. The possibility of another road does not cancel the road underfoot. The life that was not lived here cannot be borrowed from elsewhere. It cannot be used to escape responsibility, and it cannot be used to undo grief. Multiplicity may surround a life with alternatives, but it does not dissolve the local weight of what has happened. In some ways, the possibility makes each choice more tender, not because it becomes cosmically unique, but because it becomes locally irreversible. A word, once spoken here, enters this history. A kindness, once offered here, belongs to this chain. A refusal, once made here, shapes this version of the self. Other versions may branch away or exist beyond reach, but they do not replace the one that continues through this body, this memory, this day. The self is not responsible for every possible self. It is responsible for the continuity it can actually touch. The universe where the other choice was made, then, is not merely a place of fantasy. It is a way of thinking about how physical possibility, scale, and identity press against human memory. If such a universe exists, it may hold a version who turn differently at the hinge of a life. That version may be happier, or lonelier, or safer, or more wounded, or simply different in ways too detailed for imagination to predict. It may remember the same beginning and carry another ending. It may call itself by the same name and mean it completely. The question that remains is whether such alternate lives require endless distance alone. Infinite space can provide one kind of multiplicity, placing other histories beyond the observable horizon. But there is another, stranger route by which possibility may divide. It does not wait for faraway regions to repeat the same arrangement of matter. It begins inside the mathematical structure of quantum theory, where reality may not choose one outcome in the simple way ordinary experience suggests. If that picture is right, the other choice may not only exist somewhere far beyond the edge of sight, it may have branched away from the same physical past. Chapter 7. Everett's Branching Worlds. The other route into many versions does not begin beyond the cosmic horizon. It begins inside quantum theory, where physical reality behaves with a strangeness that does not need distance in order to multiply possibility. In ordinary life, an event seems to happen one way. A cup rests on the table or falls. A message arrives or does not arrive. A person turns left or turns right. The world appears to choose a single outcome, and memory then builds itself around that outcome, as if the alternatives have withdrawn into imagination. Quantum mechanics does not begin with that same simplicity. At the scale of atoms, electrons, photons, and other small systems, the theory does not usually describe one definite property waiting to be revealed. It describes a range of possible outcomes, carried in a mathematical structure called a wave function. When a measurement is made, ordinary experience receives one result, but the theory itself, in its cleanest form, evolves smoothly according to rules that do not obviously require a sudden selection. This tension became one of the deepest questions in 20th century physics. The mathematics allowed many possibilities to remain present. Experience seemed to give only one. For much of the early history of quantum mechanics, this difficulty was handled through what became broadly associated with the Copenhagen interpretation. In practical laboratory work, the method was powerful. A system could be described by probabilities before measurement, and after measurement, one result could be recorded. The mathematics predicted experiments with extraordinary precision. Yet the philosophical discomfort remained. What exactly counted as a measurement? When did a range of possibilities become a single fact? Did the wave function physically collapse? Or was collapse only a way of updating knowledge? Hugh Everett entered this problem in the 1950s with a proposal that was simple in outline and strange in implication. Instead of saying that the wave function collapses into one outcome, Everett suggested that the universal wave function continues to evolve without collapse. All the possible outcomes remain part of the total physical description, but observers become correlated with different outcomes. Each observer experiences a definite result, not because the other possibilities have vanished, but because the observer is now inside one branch of the larger wave function. The proposal was called the relative state formulation. Later, it became widely known through the phrase many worlds, though that phrase carries more drama than Everett's original language. The essential idea is not that new worlds split open in a theatrical instant. It is that the full quantum state contains multiple non-interacting branches, each with its own version of events from the perspective of the observers inside it. A measurement does not choose one reality and erase the rest. It correlates observer, instrument, and environment into separate histories that no longer share the same practical future. Everett's idea did not immediately become the dominant view. It was too spare for some physicists, too extravagant for others, and it asked people to accept a vast multiplicity in order to preserve the smoothness of the underlying equation. The scientific community had already learned how to use quantum mechanics successfully without agreeing on what it meant at the deepest level. Experiments worked. Calculations matched observation. Technologies could be built. The interpretive question remained like a shadow beside the machinery, present, but often avoidable. Still, the many worlds idea endured because it removed one mystery by accepting another. It removed the special collapse of the wave function. It did not need a separate rule telling reality when to stop being multiple and become one. Instead, it allowed the mathematics to continue. The cost was enormous multiplicity. Every quantum event with multiple possible outcomes would belong to a branching structure, and observers would find themselves inside one branch, while other branches, equally contained in the larger description, carried other results. This is where the idea begins to approach the title's central unease. If many worlds is right, then other versions of a person are not merely far away in space. They are branch descendants of a shared past. They were not always separate in the way two distant planets are separate. They emerged from the same earlier physical description, then became correlated with different outcomes. One branch records one result. Another branch records another. Each version continues locally, with its own memory of having observed a definite world. The split should not be pictured too sharply. Reality does not need to divide with a visible seam. Quantum branching, in modern discussions, is closely tied to decoherence, the process by which a quantum system becomes entangled with its environment in such a way that different outcomes stop interfering with one another in practice. The air, the light, the measuring device, the surrounding particles, the body of the observer, all become part of an expanding web of correlation. Once that happens, the branches no longer recombine in any ordinary sense. They become effectively separate histories. Decoherence gives branching a physical texture. It is not merely that a mind chooses one line from a list. It is that the environment itself carries away the information that distinguishes one outcome from another. A small quantum difference spreads into the surrounding world, becoming distributed through countless interactions. In one branch, an instrument registers one result. In another, it registers a different result. The observer in each branch sees only the result consistent with the state of that branch, because the entire local history has become aligned around it. The implications are difficult to keep small. A quantum event does not have to involve a human decision in order to matter. Most branching, if this picture is correct, would happen constantly and without attention. Particles interact, photons scatter, molecules shift, atoms decay or do not decay, and the world becomes filled with branching structures long before any person forms an intention. Human life would then be carried along inside a much larger branching process. A decision would not be the magical source of a universe, but the visible crest of deeper physical variation. Yet human decisions can still become part of the branching. A microscopic difference can alter a neural process. A slight change in perception can shift attention. Attention can alter a sentence. A sentence can alter a relationship. A relationship can alter a life. In one branch, the answer is yes. In another, it is no. The difference may have roots too small to notice, but by the time it becomes memory, it has the full weight of biography. The branch does not feel like a branch from inside. It feels like the world. This is the strange intimacy of Everett's idea. Infinite space places another version beyond distance. Many worlds places another version beyond interference. The other self is not somewhere that can be approached by crossing enough galaxies. It belongs to a different branch of the universal wave function, a history that once shared ancestry with this one and then became unavailable. If it exists, it is not remote in the ordinary way. Its separation is mathematical, physical, and practical at once. The word world can mislead here. Many worlds does not require the branching realities to be planets, rooms, or cinematic parallel dimensions. A world, in this sense, is a branch, a coherent history in which observers, instruments, records, and environments agree with one another. The version reading one result belongs to a branch where that result occurred. The version reading another belongs to a branch where the other result occurred. Both versions may have equal confidence in the solidity of their surroundings. Neither feels like an echo. This makes the other version harder to dismiss and harder to reach. If another branch contains a person who shares the same past until a certain point, that person is not merely a fictional alternative. Under the many worlds interpretation, that person would be a physical continuation of the earlier state, just as this version is. But after branching, the streams of experience no longer meet. Each version inherits the past and then adds its own memories. The shared origin does not create shared consciousness. It only gives the two lives a common root. There is a quiet sadness in the idea, though the theory itself is not sad. It means that separation may occur without anyone noticing. A person does not feel the other outcomes peeling away. There is no inner sound when a branch becomes unavailable. Experience remains seamless, because it belongs to the branch in which it continues. The versions do not watch one another depart. They simply become different continuities, each carrying the feeling that reality has remained singular. For those who are drawn to speculation, this is one of the deepest turns in modern physics. The universe may not need to repeat itself across infinite distance in order to hold other selves. It may generate multiplicity through the ordinary working of quantum law. Every laboratory measurement, every microscopic interaction, Every unstable atom, every photon that takes one path rather than another in experience, may belong to a branching structure whose totality is much larger than any one observer's world. Still, restraint matters. Many worlds is an interpretation, not a directly observed collection of alternate biographies. It is taken seriously by many physicists and philosophers because it offers a clean way to read the mathematics of quantum mechanics. But it is not a settled description of what reality finally is. Other interpretations exist. Some accept collapse. Some modify the theory. Some treat the wave function differently. The existence of other branches is not something a person can point to in a telescope or visit by experiment in the ordinary sense. But the possibility remains, because the theory that opens it is not casual. Quantum mechanics is one of the most successful frameworks ever built. Its predictions sit beneath lasers, semiconductors, magnetic resonance imaging, atomic clocks, and the precision structure of modern technology. The argument is not that strange speculation should be believed because it is strange. The argument is that a deeply successful theory contains an unresolved question about reality, and one serious answer to that question is that all outcomes continue. If that answer is right, then the life that feels singular may be only one thread of a much wider branching fabric, somewhere, not in space, but in the structure of the universal wave function. There may be versions who saw another result, spoke another word, waited one moment longer, or turned away at the instant this version stayed. Their worlds would not be illusions. They would be locally complete, filled with records, memories, consequences, and the same quiet certainty of being real. The thought does not end with the branching itself. It moves toward the moment after branching, when the histories no longer touch, and the versions begin to gather different memories around the same shared past. The question becomes less about whether reality divides and more about what it means for separated branches to continue without contact, each one sealed into its own evidence, each one becoming more different with every passing event. Chapter 8. The moment reality divides, the moment reality divides. If the many worlds picture is right, is not a moment that anyone hears. It does not arrive with a crack in the air or a visible line between one history and another. It does not present itself as a doorway. From inside experience, the world remains continuous. A hand reaches, a light changes, a thought forms, an answer is given, and afterward memory accepts the result as if reality had always been moving toward this one fact. The alternatives do not feel removed. They feel as though they were never there. Quantum theory suggests a stranger underlying story. Before a measurement or interaction settles into an experienced outcome, a small system can be described as carrying several possible results at once. This is not ordinary uncertainty, like a person not knowing which card lies face down on a table. In quantum mechanics, the possibilities are part of the physical description itself. A particle may be described by a spread of possible positions, energies, or paths, and the mathematics treats that spread with extraordinary seriousness. It is not a confession of ignorance. It is the way the theory speaks about nature before a definite result is recorded. In many worlds, that spread does not collapse into a single surviving outcome. Instead, the larger physical state continues to contain all the outcomes. While each observer becomes entangled with one result, the measuring device records one value in one branch and another value in another branch. The surrounding environment carries those records outward through countless small interactions. Soon, each branch contains not only a different result, but a different world of supporting facts, a display, a memory, a notebook, a body, an atmosphere full of scattered photons, all agreeing with the same local history. This is why branching cannot be reduced to a dramatic human decision. The world, under this interpretation, is not waiting for a person to choose before it begins to multiply. Branching would be happening constantly, quietly, at scales too small and too numerous to enter ordinary awareness. A photon reflects from a surface, an atom decays or does not decay. A molecule shifts its state, a particle interacts with another particle, and the environment begins to carry away the difference. Most branches would have no emotional content at all. They would not contain different destinies, only different physical outcomes too small for memory to notice. Yet small outcomes do not always remain small. A microscopic difference can be amplified. A single particle interaction can change a detector reading. A detector reading can change a laboratory record. A biological fluctuation can alter a neural signal. A neural signal can slightly change attention. And attention can alter what a person notices, says, avoids, or chooses. The great difference between two lives may begin in something that had no meaning when it occurred. Meaning arrives later, when matter has carried the difference upward into memory. This is one of the most unsettling parts of the branching idea. Lives do not always divide where stories say they divide. A person may later point to the visible moment, the decision, the illness, the meeting, the departure, the sentence spoken too late, but the physical difference may have begun long before that, hidden in a chain of events too fine for ordinary thought. By the time the life turns, the turn feels personal and deliberate. Yet it may have roots in a microscopic variation that entered the body, the room, or the world unnoticed. A branch where one answer is yes and another where it is no may not have begun with the answer itself. It may have begun with the timing of a nerve impulse, the faint chemistry of fatigue, the order in which memories rose, the angle of light that shifted attention, the small bodily state that made one word feel safer than another. Human choice remains human because it is lived at the level of meaning. But beneath meaning lies mechanism, and beneath mechanism lies a physical world whose smallest changes may grow into different futures. There is no need to picture a sudden fork in a road. A branch is not a road splitting beneath a traveler's feet. It is more like a loss of shared physical contact between parts of a larger quantum description. Once the environment has become entangled with different outcomes, the branches stop interfering in any practical sense. They no longer combine into a single experienced result. Each develops its own records, its own consequences, its own continuity. To the observers inside, nothing has divided. Reality has merely continued. This makes the word moment almost misleading. Branching may not be a sharp instant in the way ordinary speech suggests. Decoherence can happen extremely quickly in many everyday situations, because large warm environments are constantly interacting with themselves. Air molecules, light, dust, heat, surfaces, instruments, and bodies do not leave delicate quantum possibilities isolated for long. They gather information from one another continuously. A fragile superposition, once exposed to such an environment, becomes distributed into the world around it, and the different outcomes become practically unavailable to one another. The result is separation without distance. Two branches may not be separated by miles or galaxies. They are separated by the structure of correlation. One version of the world contains one set of records, and another version contains another set. Each branch has its own consistency. A person in one branch remembers seeing one outcome because the brain, the instrument, and the environment in that branch all carry the history of that outcome. Another person, with a shared past before the branch, remembers otherwise with equal naturalness. Neither memory feels partial from the inside. For the question of other selves, this matters deeply. The other version in a branch is not an unrelated duplicate built elsewhere from repeated matter. It may be a continuation from the same earlier physical state. Before the branching, the histories were not two separate biographies. They were part of one larger physical description. Afterward, they no longer share experience. Each version inherits the past and then begins to accumulate difference. First, perhaps in a single recorded outcome, then in thoughts, actions, relationships, and years. The separation would not be felt as loss. That is part of its quiet severity. If many worlds is true, a person does not experience other branches fading away. There is no sensation of leaving them. Awareness remains aligned with one local history, and the other histories, if real, contain their own aligned awareness. The versions do not mourn the division at the moment it happens, because none of them stands outside it. Each continues as though the universe has remained singular. From the inside, this continuity is complete. A version who chose differently would not feel like a secondary copy. It would remember the shared childhood, the same private embarrassments, the same old fears, the same language of the inner voice. Then, after the branch, it would begin to carry new memories that this version does not have. Over time, the shared past would become a smaller portion of the whole life. The other version would become less like a twin and more like a stranger who once began from the same source. This gradual divergence may be more disturbing than a clean difference. If another branch contained a life entirely unlike this one, it would be easier to set aside. But a branch that remains close for years, differing only in small ways, keeps pressing against the idea of uniqueness. Somewhere in the larger structure, if the interpretation is right, there may be versions who are almost indistinguishable for a long time. They remember the same people, they keep the same habits, they wake in the same room. Only slowly do their histories begin to separate, through consequences that accumulate too gently to announce themselves. A person may imagine one branch where a danger was avoided, another where a danger was met, one where a word was kinder, another where it was harsher, one where an ordinary hesitation changed nothing, and another where it changed everything. The differences do not need to begin with dramatic choices, because a life is a sensitive arrangement. A small change in timing can alter an encounter. A small change in mood can alter a sentence. A small change in a sentence can alter another person's response. The branches, if they exist, may grow apart through ordinary causality, not through spectacle. The same thought can be extended beyond human biography. Entire histories of planets may turn on small physical differences. A mutation occurs in one branch and not in another. A weather pattern shifts. A lineage survives. A species changes its range. A civilization emerges under slightly different conditions. The branching structure, if real, would not be arranged around human meaning, but human meaning would be carried within it wherever conscious beings arise. Some branches would contain no important human difference. Others might eventually contain worlds that no longer resemble one another at all. This is why many worlds can feel both intimate and indifferent. It may contain versions of a person, but it does not create them for a reason. It does not preserve every outcome because every outcome matters emotionally. It preserves them in the interpretation because the wave function continues according to its law. The same structure that would allow another version to survive a danger would also allow countless branches where nothing of personal importance changes. Reality, in this picture, is not sentimental. It is abundant. The abundance can be difficult to bear because it has no center. No branch is marked from the outside as the real one, while the others fade into story. Each branch is real to itself, carrying its own records and observers. The version in this branch cannot claim cosmic priority simply because this is the version being experienced here. That feeling of centrality belongs to every version from within its own continuity. The self feels singular because awareness is local, not because the larger structure must be singular. And still, local awareness is enough to make a life real. If other branches exist, they do not make this branch less lived. They do not thin the present moment into an illusion. The fact that other outcomes may continue elsewhere in the quantum structure does not make this outcome false. It only places it inside a larger pattern, one that cannot be seen from outside by any observer within it. The solidity of experience remains, even if the totality behind experience is wider than it appears. The moment reality divides, then, is not a cinematic moment of separation. It is the quiet growth of non-contact. A difference enters the physical world, spreads through interaction, becomes a record, becomes a memory, becomes a life. Branches continue, not as visible neighboring places, but as mutually unavailable histories. The other version does not stand behind a veil waiting to be found. It goes on inside its own evidence, while this version goes on inside this one. And once that possibility is allowed, the next thought becomes more difficult. If branching never truly stops, could there always be some branch where a conscious life continues even when most branches end? Chapter 9. Quantum Immortality and the Most Dangerous Speculation. The thought arrives almost naturally once branching worlds have been allowed into the mind. If every physically possible quantum outcome continues in some branch, then there may be branches where a person survives dangers that in other branches bring life to an end. Most outcomes may be ordinary and unnoticed. Some may be severe. A body may fail in one history and continue in another. A chance event may fall one way here and another way elsewhere in the branching structure. From the outside, if there were any outside broad enough to see the whole wave function, the result would be many outcomes. From inside one stream of awareness, there is only the branch in which awareness continues. This is the beginning of the idea often called quantum immortality. It is not an established scientific conclusion. It is not a medical fact, not a promise, not a comfort that should be trusted, and not something anyone should ever try to test. It belongs to the far speculative edge of the many worlds interpretation, where questions about consciousness, probability, survival, and branch selection become difficult to separate. Its power lies not in evidence that it is true, but in the strange pressure it places on the meaning of death if every quantum possibility is allowed to continue somewhere. The simplest form of the idea says that if a conscious observer faces a situation with many possible outcomes, and at least one of those outcomes contains continued consciousness, then the observer's experience can only continue along a branch where experience continues. Branches where consciousness ends contain no future first-person experience for that observer. They may exist in the larger structure, but they are not lived forward by the person whose awareness has ended there. The result is an unsettling asymmetry. From a third-person view, a person may die in many branches. From a first-person view, experience may only ever find itself in branches where it has not yet stopped. The idea sounds sharper than it should, because the words make it too clean. Real bodies do not move through danger as simple yes or no machines. Survival is not always neat. Consciousness is not a light switch whose every condition is perfectly understood. Injury, illness, aging, memory loss, pain, and decline do not fit comfortably into the simple image of one branch ending and another continuing untouched. Even if many worlds is right, and even if all outcomes continue, it does not follow that the continuing branch would be gentle, whole, or desirable. Continuation is not the same as rescue. This is why the speculation is dangerous if treated carelessly. It can make survival sound guaranteed when no such guarantee exists in the world that anyone can responsibly live within. The body remains fragile. Medicine remains necessary. Risk remains real. Death remains real to those who witness it, and real in every branch where a life ends. Many worlds, even if true, does not erase grief from the branches where grief occurs. It does not return anyone to the people who lost them. It does not make harm reversible. It only raises a strange question about what first-person experience could ever encounter as its own final boundary. The thought can be approached more safely if it is kept as philosophy rather than promise. A person cannot experience being absent. This is not a quantum claim by itself. It is an old fact about consciousness. Experience contains experiences. It cannot contain its own non-existence as an event that is later remembered. Quantum immortality adds a branching framework to that old puzzle. If there are many outcomes, and if in some very unlikely branch awareness persists, then perhaps awareness will always seem to have continued from its own point of view. But seem is doing delicate work here. It does not make the idea true. It only describes the pressure of the speculation. A body could pass through many branching dangers and continue in a smaller and smaller measure of branches. In most histories, the danger may end the life. In a rare one, something happens differently. A diagnosis is caught earlier. A fall is avoided by a tiny delay. A cell behaves differently. A blood vessel holds. A particle interaction changes a chain of events that later matters. From the inside of the surviving branch, The survival may feel unlikely, perhaps even impossible in retrospect, yet the person inside that branch does not experience the vast number of branches where survival failed. Those histories have no continuing stream for that observer. The terror of the idea is not that it promises eternal youth. It does not. A continuing observer, if such a thing were possible across branching histories, would still remain inside a body governed by time. The branches where survival persists may become increasingly narrow, increasingly damaged, increasingly strange. Aging would not disappear. Frailty would not become unreal. A life prolonged only by the existence of rare surviving branches could become less like immortality and more like an endless thinning of possible continuations. The word immortality may be the wrong word for the mood of the idea. It suggests triumph, while the speculation may contain something much colder. There is also the problem of identity. If a branch continues with a damaged memory, is that the same observer in the sense that matters? If the brain changes severely, if personality alters, if continuity becomes partial, where does the you in quantum immortality reside? A body may continue while the self that once inhabited it has changed beyond recognition. A branch may contain biological survival without preserving the pattern that made a person feel like a particular person. The speculation depends on consciousness, yet consciousness itself remains one of the least settled subjects in science and philosophy. Many worlds does not solve that problem. It gives a structure in which outcomes branch, but it does not by itself explain why awareness is attached to one branch rather than another, or how first-person continuity should be counted across branches. This is sometimes called a measure problem in nearby discussions, though the details vary by context. If some branches have greater weight than others, then it may not be enough to say that any surviving branch exists. The overwhelming weight of outcomes may still lie in endings, while the surviving branches become vanishingly small parts of the total structure. Existence somewhere is not the same as ordinary expectation. The difference between possible and probable matters here. In daily life, people cannot live by clinging to every physically possible exception. A person crosses a road because the visible danger is manageable, not because there exists a branch where every disaster is avoided. Medicine works by probabilities, evidence, and care inside the branch that can be acted upon. A rare branch cannot be used as a plan. It cannot be trusted as protection. It cannot answer the practical reality that choices here carry consequences here. The speculative survival of some version elsewhere does not remove responsibility from this version. And yet the idea remains haunting because it touches the one boundary no one can observe from the other side. Death is known through bodies, records, absences, and the grief of those who remain. It is not known as a remembered experience by the person who has died. A conscious being can approach the boundary in thought, in fear, in illness, in risk, but cannot report the state of not being. Quantum immortality enters that silence and asks whether, under many worlds, experience might always find itself in a continuation, however narrow, however altered, however improbable. It is a question shaped less like comfort than like a corridor that refuses to show its final wall. For those who first encounter the idea, it can feel almost seductive. It seems to offer a way around the most absolute fact of life. But that seduction is precisely why it must be held at a distance. A speculation can be interesting and still unsafe as a belief. It can be logically strange and still useless as guidance. No person should live as though the universe owes them a surviving branch. The only branch available for care, kindness, medicine, caution, and love is the one being lived. Whatever the larger structure may be, responsibility remains local. There is another, quieter problem. If a person survives in one branch, the people in branches where that person died still suffer the absence. Their grief is not cancelled by another version's continuation. A parent, friend, child, or partner in one branch does not receive news that somewhere else the life continued. The surviving version does not comfort them. The non-surviving branches, if many worlds is true, contain real losses from the perspective of those within them. Multiplicity spreads consequence. It does not erase it. The idea also changes the fear of being the unlucky version. If many outcomes exist, then some versions will inherit the worst continuations. A person may imagine themselves always waking in the branch where survival happened, but the branches of pain, injury, loss, and decline would also be part of the total picture. There is no clear reason to treat the continuing stream as blessed. It may be simply the one that can still ask questions. The fact of asking does not prove safety. It only proves that, here, questioning has not ended. This is where quantum immortality becomes less like a promise of endless life and more like a puzzle about observation. First-person experience cannot step outside itself to compare all branches. It cannot count the versions that ended. It cannot feel the measure of the wave function. It cannot know whether its survival is ordinary, rare, or part of some deeper pattern. It only finds itself present, again and again, until it does not. If the final absence cannot be experienced, then even in a single-world universe, consciousness never witnesses its own ending as a later memory. Many worlds does not create that mystery. It intensifies it. There may be branches, in this speculative picture, where a person survives an event against nearly all expectation. There may be branches where the body continues in altered form. There may be branches where medical care arrives in time, where chance leans toward continuation, where small physical differences gather into one more day. But those branches, if they exist, are not proof of immortality in the human sense. They are only continuations. They do not guarantee wholeness. They do not guarantee meaning. They do not guarantee that the self remains unchanged enough to feel like the same self. For a sleep story, the idea must be allowed to cool. It should not remain as alarm. It can settle into a broader and softer recognition. Existence is always known from the inside, and the inside has no view of the total structure. Whether reality contains one history or many, consciousness lives locally. It wakes into one stream, gathers one set of memories, carries one body, and meets the world through one fragile continuity. The possibility of other branches may widen the background, but it does not make this local life less immediate. The most dangerous speculation, therefore, returns to the same quiet lesson as the earlier ones, though it is not really a lesson. If many worlds is true, reality may contain branches where a version continues beyond dangers that end other versions. If quantum immortality has any coherence at all, it belongs to that unsettling relationship between survival and observation. But it remains unproven, contested, and impossible to use as shelter. The life available for tenderness and caution is still this one, the one whose future is not guaranteed by any interpretation. Beyond that, the question of survival gives way to a deeper question of identity. If another version continues, if another version remembers the same childhood, if another version inherits the same name and carries the same private sense of being, what makes that version truly the same self rather than another self with the same beginning? The multiverse can multiply bodies, histories, and memories, but it does not immediately explain what personal sameness means. To ask whether one survives in another branch is already to ask what the word one is doing inside the vastness of possible lives. Chapter 10. Are the other versions really you? The question of other versions eventually reaches a quieter and more difficult place. It is no longer enough to ask whether another body exists, or whether another branch contains a life that continued differently. The deeper question is whether that other life would truly be you. A perfect copy may carry the same memories. A branching version may inherit the same past. A distant duplicate may speak with the same voice, answer to the same name, and feel the same inward certainty of being the original. Yet sameness, when pressed too hard, begins to separate into several different meanings. A person seems singular from the inside because awareness arrives as one continuous stream. Morning follows sleep. Memory gathers yesterday into today. The body changes, but slowly enough for identity to remain familiar. A child becomes an adult. Cells are replaced, opinions soften or harden, and still a person says I as if one unbroken thread has passed through all of it. The self is not usually experienced as a collection of physical states. It is experienced as continuity, a movement from one moment into the next, carrying memory forward like a quiet inheritance. The multiverse disturbs this because it allows sameness without shared continuity. A distant duplicate, if such a thing exists in endless space, might be arranged atom for atom in the same pattern as this body and brain. It might contain the same memories, not as borrowed memories, but as its own physical structure. It would remember the same childhood, the same voices, the same mistakes, the same private thoughts that were never spoken aloud. From its own point of view, it would not be pretending. It would not be a counterfeit in its own experience. It would be a person who says "I" with complete sincerity. But sincerity from within does not settle identity from without. If two identical minds exist in two unreachable regions, each may feel original, but neither awareness flows into the other. One does not wake inside both bodies. One does not receive two streams of sensation. If one is hurt, the other does not feel the pain. If one is comforted, the other does not become calmer. Their sameness of pattern is immense, but their experience is divided. The copy is not false, yet it is not shared. This is the first distinction. There is physical sameness, and there is experiential continuity. Physical sameness asks whether the arrangement is the same. Experiential continuity asks whether one moment of awareness becomes the next within the same stream. A perfect duplicate may satisfy the first condition while failing the second. It may be made of the same pattern, but it does not continue this stream. It begins, or exists, as its own stream, complete to itself and sealed away from the one that asks about it. Branching versions create a different problem. In a many worlds picture, two versions may not begin as separate duplicates placed far apart. They may share a real physical past. Before the branch, there is one history described in a larger quantum state. After the branch, there are versions correlated with different outcomes. Each inherits the same memories before separation. Each has a strong claim to being the continuation of the earlier person. Neither is merely a copy made elsewhere. Both are descendants of the same prior state. Here the ordinary idea of identity begins to strain. If one person becomes two branch descendants, which one is the original? The question may be badly formed. Both continue from the same past. Both remember being the earlier person. Both carry the same character until new experiences begin to alter them. There may be no single privileged continuation unless some deeper rule marks one branch as uniquely real. In many worlds, that rule is precisely what has been removed. The structure allows both continuations, and the old singular language of the one real future no longer fits easily. Yet from inside each branch, there is no confusion. Each version experiences one path. Each says, "I came from that past, and now this happened." The version who survived a danger remembers the danger and continuation. The version who avoided a conversation remembers avoidance. The version who spoke remembers speaking. None of them experiences being divided. None stands at a fork watching the other self depart. The split is visible only from the outside description, and no observer inside one branch has access to that whole view. This makes personal identity more local than it first appears. The self may not be a cosmic label attached to one body across all possible realities. It may be the lived continuity of a particular path. A branch version can be genuinely descended from the same past without being available to this awareness. A distant duplicate can be perfectly similar without being this stream. A near copy can resemble a life so closely that difference seems almost meaningless from the outside, while from the inside the separation remains complete. Memory complicates the matter further. People often treat memory as the foundation of identity. A person is the same person because they remember what happened before, but memory can be copied in thought experiments, altered by illness, weakened by age, or shared by two branch descendants after a split. If memory alone made identity, then every perfect copy with the same memories would be equally the same self. That may be one possible answer, but it comes at a cost. It makes identity branchable, repeatable, and no longer exclusive. Continuity of the body offers another answer. A person remains the same because the same living organism persists through time. The body grows, heals, ages, and changes, but it does so through connected biological process. This view handles ordinary life well. It explains why a person remains themselves despite forgetting many things. It connects identity to metabolism, nervous system, and the physical persistence of a living being. But in a branching universe, two future bodies may both descend from the same earlier body state in the quantum description. In a duplication universe, an identical body elsewhere may match the organism without sharing its causal history. The body helps, but it does not remove all difficulty. Causal history may be the strongest thread. This version of the self is not merely a pattern. It is a pattern produced by a particular chain of events. One moment became the next here. The current body carries traces of what happened to this body. The current mind has been shaped by this stream of experience. Even when memory fails, the causal path remains. In that sense, another version may be similar, or even equally descended from a shared past, but it belongs to its own continuation once the paths separate. The phrase "another you" therefore contains a hidden ambiguity. It can mean another person exactly like you. It can mean another person who shares your past up to a branch. It can mean another person who would answer to your name and mean it. It can mean another physical system that realizes the same mind pattern. Or it can mean the impossible thing most people feel when they first hear the idea. This exact awareness living somewhere else. The last meaning may be the hardest to defend. Awareness does not seem to spread across copies simply because the copies resemble one another. If another version exists, that version may be as real as this one. It may matter morally, it may suffer and feel joy, it may love, fear, remember, decide and regret, but its reality does not make its experiences transferable. A copy's happiness is not stored as hidden happiness here. A branch version's wisdom does not arrive as instinct. A distant duplicate's survival does not protect this body. To treat other versions as real is not the same as treating them as possessions of this self. There is a tenderness in that distinction. It allows the other versions, if they exist, to be more than decorative possibilities around one central life. They would not exist merely to comfort, frighten, or complete this version. They would be centers of experience in their own right. Each would live from the inside. Each would have its own claim on reality. The self here may not be alone in the larger structure, but it also cannot own the others. Multiplicity does not create a kingdom of copies around one throne. It creates many local centers, each private to itself. The fear of losing uniqueness changes under this view. At first, the possibility of another version seems to make a person less unique. If there are copies, then perhaps the self becomes replaceable. But replaceability depends on what matters. A physical pattern might be repeated, a set of memories might be duplicated, a biography might be echoed in another region. Yet this continuity, this exact unfolding of awareness, remains local. Even if other versions exist, none of them lives this moment for this stream. None can substitute for the one being lived. The opposite fear is also possible. If other versions are not really this self, then the multiverse may become lonelier rather than less lonely. It may contain countless lives that resemble this one, yet none can be entered. Infinite versions may not mean an expanded self. They mean an expanded population of separate selves, each carrying its own solitude. The universe could be crowded with near-identical minds and still leave each one alone inside its own consciousness. This thought has a severe clarity. A person may be repeated without being shared. A life may branch without becoming collective. A memory may exist in more than one stream and still remain private within each. The word "you" begins to shrink back from cosmic scale and return to lived continuity. It does not necessarily name every possible copy. It names the path that is aware of itself here, the one whose sensations arrive through this body, whose memories are arranged in this mind, whose next moment must be entered from this one. And yet the other versions cannot be dismissed as nothing. If a branching version shares the same past until separation, it has a deep kinship with this self. If a distant duplicate carries the same pattern, it has a resemblance beyond ordinary resemblance. If a near copy made another choice, it embodies a possibility that this life can understand almost too well. The right language may not be identity or difference alone, it may be relation. The other version is not exactly this self, and not merely a stranger. It is a neighboring answer to the question of what this arrangement could become. Such relation would be impossible to feel directly. No sympathy travels between branches. No recognition crosses from one cosmic region to another. Still, the idea changes how the self appears in thought. The person becomes less like a sealed object and more like one local expression of a pattern that may, under certain assumptions, have other expressions. The pattern may repeat, the history may branch, the possible life may unfold elsewhere. But the awareness here remains bound to its own continuation, one breath, one memory, one decision at a time. The question of whether other versions are really you therefore has no simple answer, because really asks for a certainty that the idea itself dissolves. They may be physically identical. They may be psychologically continuous from the same past. They may be morally real. They may be close enough to make language tremble, but they are not available from inside this stream, and that unavailability matters. The self may not be singular in the architecture of reality, but it remains singular in the experience of being lived. Once that is understood, the multiverse becomes less like a promise of replacement and more like an enlargement of consequence. If other versions are real, they do not cancel this version. They multiply the places where joy and suffering may occur. Some lives may unfold with gentleness, others with loss. Some may find the path this one missed, while others may carry burdens this one escaped. The question of identity turns naturally toward a wider emotional field, where infinite versions do not merely ask who counts as the self, but what it would mean for happiness, sorrow, and memory to be distributed across realities that cannot touch. Chapter 11. Infinite Suffering. Infinite Happiness. If other versions are real, then the question of identity cannot remain alone for long. It widens into the question of feeling. A copied life would not merely think, it would suffer, hope, remember, wait, misunderstand, recover, and lose. A branch version would not be a decorative possibility arranged around this life. It would have its own present tense, its own body, its own local weather of emotion. And if the multiverse contains not one or two alternate lives, but an immense field of them, then joy and sorrow may be distributed across reality in ways no single mind can gather. The first thought often turns toward comfort. Somewhere, perhaps, there is a version who healed, a version who did not lose the person who vanished from this life, a version who chose earlier, spoke more gently, arrived in time, avoided the accident, found the better road, or grew old beside the one who remained absent here. The idea seems to place consolation beyond the horizon. It suggests that what was denied in one life may have been granted in another, and that the universe, by multiplying histories, may have preserved the possibility that felt most precious. But the comfort is unstable, because the same reasoning opens the opposite direction. If there are versions who avoided pain, there may be versions who met pain more deeply. If there are lives where the danger passed, there may be lives where it arrived. If one history softened, another may have hardened. Infinite variation does not select only the gentle alternatives. It contains the paths that memory longs for, and also the paths it fears. The multiverse, if it exists in this way, does not behave like mercy. It behaves like possibility. That is why the emotional landscape of many versions is not simple. A happier version may exist, but its happiness does not cross into this nervous system. A suffering version may exist, but its suffering does not become sensation here. Each life is sealed into its own continuity, and yet the mind that contemplates them cannot remain completely indifferent. The thought of other joys and other griefs, even unreachable ones, changes the shape of what it means to be one person among possible persons. It makes existence feel less singular and at the same time less shareable. A version who found happiness elsewhere would not be imaginary to itself. It would wake into mornings that belong to it, not to this life. Its relief would be real. Its laughter would have weight inside its own world. Its body would carry the warmth of its own fortunate events. If it looked backward at the dangerous crossing, where this life turned one way and it turned another, it might feel gratitude without ever knowing that another version carried the cost. Its happiness would be complete locally, even if it could not be transferred. A version who suffered more severely would also be real to itself. That is the harder thought. It would not exist merely as an abstract warning or a dark reflection. It would have its own hours, its own endurance, its own attempts to make meaning from what happened. In one branch, a mistake may have been avoided. In another, it may have deepened. In one distant repetition, a body may have recovered. In another, the same body may have declined. If the field of possible lives is wide enough, then the emotional range of existence may be wider than any one life can bear to imagine. The moral instinct struggles here. If another version suffers, does this version owe anything to it? The ordinary forms of duty depend on contact. A person can comfort someone nearby, send help across distance, change behavior, repair a harm, speak a word, share food, offer care, but a branch that cannot be reached, or a universe beyond causal contact, cannot be helped in the usual sense. Its suffering may be real, but inaccessible. Its happiness may be real, but unshared. Moral reality and practical reach begin to separate. There is a temptation to solve this by dismissing the other versions as not truly relevant. Since they cannot be touched, perhaps they do not matter. But that answer feels too easy. Distance has never made suffering unreal. A person on the far side of Earth still matters, even if no message has yet been sent. The difference in the multiverse is not moral distance alone, it is causal closure. If no signal can cross, if no action can alter the other branch or other region, then concern has no ordinary path into consequence. The heart may still react, but the hands have nowhere to go. This gives the speculation a strange tenderness and a strange helplessness. To think of infinite versions is to imagine countless centers of feeling that may be as private to themselves as this one is here. Some are peaceful, some are wounded, some are ordinary in the deepest sense, carrying no grand tragedy and no extraordinary joy, only the long middle texture of work, hunger, memory, fatigue, affection, boredom, and small decisions. A multiverse of selves would not be a hall of dramatic extremes alone. It would also contain quiet lives whose differences are too small to be named. The thought of infinite happiness is not as simple as it first appears. Happiness depends on context, memory, temperament, expectation, body, and relation. A version who gained the thing desired here may discover that it did not carry the expected peace. A version who avoided one loss may meet another kind of loneliness. A version who became successful may become afraid of losing success. A version who remained unknown may keep a softness that another life surrendered. If there are many versions, there may be many forms of happiness, and none of them may be the perfect answer that regret imagines. Suffering, too, is not one thing. It can be sharp and brief, or dull and long. It can isolate a person, or deepen their dependence on others. It can make a life smaller, or give it a different seriousness. The multiverse should not be made into a machine for balancing pain with wisdom. Suffering does not need to be justified in order to be real. Yet, different versions of a life, if they exist, would meet suffering under different conditions, with different bodies, different companions, different histories of resilience, and different meanings attached to what happened. No two wounds would be exactly the same once they entered different lives. This is where infinite versions become less like copies and more like persons. A copy, in ordinary speech, sounds secondary. A version sounds derivative. But from the inside, each would be primary. Each would own its sensations directly. Each would be the center of its own concern. The language of duplication belongs to the observer trying to compare them. The language of personhood belongs to each life as it is lived. If a multiverse exists, it may not diminish persons by multiplying them. It may multiply the number of places where personhood appears. That possibility carries a quiet, ethical pressure. If another version is real, then its happiness is not less real because it is not this happiness. Its grief is not less real because it cannot be reached. The universe may contain unshared feeling without making that feeling meaningless. Each branch, each distant repetition, each near copy would hold its own local value. The tragedy is not that other versions are fake. The tragedy, if it is one, is that reality may be wide enough to contain them while keeping them forever apart. For this version, however, the practical circle remains small. The people who can be loved are the people inside this reachable world. The harms that can be reduced are the harms inside this chain of events. The kindness that matters here must be performed here. If infinite other lives exist, they do not remove the need for care in this one. They may even sharpen it, because they show how little of the whole can be touched and how precious the touchable portion becomes. A person may imagine that another version is happier and feel a strange envy toward a being who may never be known. Yet that envy has no object that can answer. The happier version, if it exists, is busy living its own life, carrying its own later disappointments, making its own mistakes, slowly becoming less identical with every passing day. It does not exist to accuse this life of failure. It is not proof that this life went wrong. It is only another continuation under other conditions. A person may also imagine that another version is suffering and feel a guilt without action. But guilt belongs most properly where responsibility has a path. This life did not choose the branch structure of reality. It did not arrange the distant copies. It did not create all possible harms by continuing here. If other versions suffer, their suffering may matter in a way that thought can acknowledge. But this version's task remains bound to the region where its choices have force. Responsibility, like awareness, is local. Still, the mind may not fully release the others. It may hold them as a vast, unseen population of possible selves, each one close enough to unsettle and far enough to remain unreachable. The version who lived gently, the version who became cruel, the version who was spared, the version who was broken, the version who never met the person who changed everything, the version who met them earlier, the version who survived, the version who ended, the version who became almost the same person with one hidden difference that only years later came to matter. No single version can stand for the whole. That may be the most important restraint. There is no one alternate self who answers the meaning of this life. There is no one happier double who proves what should have happened. No one suffering double who proves what was escaped. A multiverse of versions would be too large for such neat symbolism. It would contain contradiction without resolve it. It would allow a life to be fortunate in one branch, tragic in another, ordinary in another, and none of these would cancel the others. This makes the self feel both smaller and more serious. Smaller because it may not be the only instance of its pattern. More serious because no other instance can live this continuity on its behalf. Even if happiness exists elsewhere, it is not automatically inherited. Even if sorrow exists elsewhere, it is not automatically born here. The life being lived remains the only place where this stream can act, mend, choose, rest, and continue. The thought of infinite suffering and infinite happiness therefore does not lead to a conclusion. It settles into a condition. Reality, if multiple in this way, may contain countless centers of experience, each surrounded by its own evidence, each believing naturally in the immediacy of its world. Some may be living the wished-for life. Some may be carrying the feared one. Most may be living something more difficult to classify, neither reward nor punishment, only the ordinary unfolding of a world that became theirs. And once joy and suffering have been scattered across possible versions, another question begins to rise beneath them. If there are countless selves, countless branches, countless observers waking into their own local worlds, why is awareness here in this one and not somewhere else? Why does experience open through this body, this memory, this history, while other versions, if they exist, remain sealed behind their own first-person walls? The multiverse can multiply lives, but it does not easily explain why any life is lived from the inside as this one. Chapter 12. The probability problem of being this one. if reality contains countless selves, the strangest question may not be whether they exist. It may be why awareness is here, not here in the ordinary sense of a room, a city, or a planet, but here inside this one stream of memory, this one body, this one version of events. If other versions wake with equal certainty, if other observers look out from their own local histories and feel themselves to be the center of experience, then the word I becomes difficult to place. It does not float above the multiverse and choose a branch. It appears already embedded in one life. In ordinary thinking, this question rarely arises. A person is born into a body, grows through childhood, gathers memory, and simply becomes the one who says I. The connection feels natural because there is no comparison available from the inside. A person does not wake each morning wondering why they are not someone else. The continuity of memory answers the question before it is asked. This body slept, this body woke, this mind remembers yesterday, therefore experience belongs here. The answer is practical, immediate, and usually enough. A multiverse weakens that comfort because it multiplies the possible centers of experience. If there are many versions of the same person, many observers with the same memories up to a point, then each one has its own natural claim to being the one. A version in a distant repeated region would not feel like an extra. A branch version in many worlds would not feel like a secondary continuation. Each would open its eyes into its own evidence, its own body, its own remembered past, and each would find the same inward word waiting there. I. The difficulty is not only emotional, it is also probabilistic. In a single ordinary situation, probability can often be counted. A coin has two sides. A die has 6 faces. A shuffled deck has a fixed number of arrangements. But in a multiverse, the act of counting observers becomes obscure. If there are infinitely many versions, then how many are there of each kind? If every possible outcome occurs, then what does it mean to say one outcome was likely? If every physically allowed life exists somewhere, then why should this version find itself in this particular arrangement rather than another? This is sometimes called a measure problem, though the phrase belongs to several related debates. The measure is, roughly, the way a theory assigns weight or typicality to different outcomes, branches, or observers. In ordinary life, probability guides expectation because not all outcomes are treated equally. But if a multiverse contains endless observers, or if many worlds contains branches with different weights, then counting becomes more complicated than listing possibilities. A rare version may exist, but existence alone does not tell how much weight it carries in the larger structure. This matters because human intuition often treats existence and likelihood as if they were the same. If there is a branch where a person survives, the mind may want to say that survival has a special claim. If there is a distant universe where a better life unfolded, the mind may imagine that life is equally available in the total picture. But a possibility can exist and still be vanishingly rare by whatever measure the theory uses. A world can be real if the theory permits it, without being typical. The strange thing is that no observer wakes into a statistical table. Each wakes into one experienced reality and begins there. The question then becomes personal in a new way. Why this reality? Why this body with this memory and this particular chain of accidents behind it? If countless versions exist, some more fortunate, some less fortunate, some almost identical, some remote in every emotional sense, what attaches awareness to this stream? It is possible that the question has no answer beyond the fact of being this stream. It may be that first-person experience does not select from versions at all. It simply occurs wherever the conditions for experience occur, and each occurrence feels central from within. That answer is simple, but not soothing. It means there is no hidden observer standing outside reality before birth, choosing where to enter. There is no wandering point of awareness assigned to one branch rather than another. Each conscious system, if it exists, is its own local center. The feeling of being this one is generated inside the very structure that is being lived. It does not need a cosmic lottery beforehand. It is not a soul drawing a number from a hat. It is the local fact of consciousness appearing in a body capable of saying I. Still, The lottery image keeps returning because consciousness feels singular. From the outside, one may imagine many versions arranged across branches or distant regions. From the inside, awareness is not spread across them. It is here, indivisible in the only way it knows itself. The self can think about other versions, but it does not feel their hunger, their relief, their injuries, their remembered mornings. If all of them are conscious, then each has its own first-person enclosure. The multiverse may be crowded with centers, but each center remains alone in its own interior. Anthropic reasoning tries to handle some of this strangeness without turning it into mysticism. Brandon Carter introduced anthropic ideas in cosmology to remind scientists that observations are made from places where observers can exist. A universe hostile to life would have no one in it to measure its hostility. A region with no atoms, no stable stars, no chemistry, and no long-lived structure would not produce astronomers wondering why their universe is barren. Observation is already filtered by the conditions that permit observers. In a multiverse, that filter becomes more important. If many regions exist with different physical conditions, then conscious beings will find themselves only in the subset where conscious beings can arise. This does not mean the universe was designed for them. It only means that no one should be surprised to observe conditions compatible with observation. The deeper problem is that this compatibility may still leave many possible observer-containing regions. A person may ask not only why they are in a habitable universe, but why they are this observer in this habitable universe, at this time, with this life. The weak anthropic principle can answer part of the question, but not all of it. It can explain why experience is not found in places where experience cannot form. It cannot fully explain the intimate fact of being one particular self rather than another. It does not tell why awareness opens through this narrow biological history instead of through a different body on the same planet, or a copy in a distant region, or a branch where events turned otherwise. It gives a filter, not a complete account of first-person placement. One possibility is that the sense of placement is not something to be explained from outside. It may be like asking why a flame is this flame rather than another flame. The flame does not travel among candles and choose one. It appears where the conditions produce it. Consciousness may be similar in the limited sense that it arises where certain physical conditions are present, and each arising is local. If many such arisings occur, then many centers exist. Each one is not unlucky or lucky to be itself. It is itself because that is where that stream exists. Yet the emotional mind resists this. It wants the question to mean something more. It wants to know why this life, with its particular burdens and protections, was the one given from the inside. It notices that there might be versions with less pain, more clarity, better timing, a kinder childhood, a safer body, a longer life. It notices, too, that there might be versions with heavier losses, harsher circumstances, and fewer chances to recover. The thought of many possible observers makes gratitude and unease appear together. This version may not be the best possible one, but it may also not be the worst. If every observer feels central, then centrality itself becomes local. The universe does not need a single privileged viewpoint. It may contain countless viewpoints, each feeling naturally like the place where reality is happening. This is already true in ordinary life among different people. Every conscious being lives from its own center. The multiverse simply extends that familiar truth into stranger territory, where some centers may resemble one another so closely that the boundary between another person and another version becomes hard to name. The probability problem grows sharper when exact copies are considered. Suppose there are many identical versions with the same memories up to this moment. Before they diverge, each contains the same psychological state. If one asks, "Which one am I?" there may be no internal evidence that distinguishes them. Each asks the same question. Each has the same past. Each believes itself to be the original. The answer from within cannot be obtained by looking deeper into memory, because memory is part of what has been copied. Once they diverge, each version begins to acquire new evidence. One hears a sound that another does not. One receives a message that another never receives. One moves into a slightly different future. After that, the question changes. Each is now the center of its own stream, and the shared past begins to recede. But before divergence, if the copies are truly exact, the question of being this one may have no hidden fact beyond the physical existence of each center. There are several I statements, each locally true. This can feel like the self has been reduced, but it may also clarify what the self has always been. The self is not a label guaranteed to appear only once in reality. It is a living continuity, maintained by body, memory, relation, and time. If the pattern appears elsewhere, another continuity may begin or continue there. The existence of that other continuity does not make this one thinner. It only means that identity may not have the cosmic exclusiveness human intuition gives it. Probability remains difficult because the first-person perspective cannot inspect all versions. A person cannot step outside the branches, count the observers, weigh the possible lives, and then return with certainty about why this one was entered. Scientific theories can attempt to define measures. Philosophers can debate typicality. Cosmologists can ask what kinds of observers a model predicts, but the living experience remains immediate. It does not arrive as an answer to a calculation. It arrives as a morning, a body, a memory, a room, a thought continuing from the previous thought. Perhaps that is why the multiverse feels so personally strange. It turns the ordinary fact of being someone into a cosmic puzzle. In a single worldview, being this person is simply the given condition of life. In a many-world or infinite space view, being this person becomes one instance among a field of possible instances. Nothing about daily experience visibly changes. The hands remain the same. The memories remain arranged as before. Yet the background has widened until the question, "Why am I this one?" seems to echo beyond the local life that asks it. No final answer is needed for the unease to matter. The possibility itself is enough to loosen the familiar edges of identity. If there are many observers, many copies, many versions, then awareness may be both ordinary and mysterious. Ordinary because it arises wherever the physical conditions allow it. Mysterious because each instance knows only itself from within. The multiverse may not explain the self. It may instead reveal how strange the self already was. And once that strangeness has entered the idea of probability, the mind naturally begins searching its own private evidence. It looks at dreams that feel like other lives, memories that seem almost borrowed, moments of déjà vu, and the quiet sensation that a different path has somehow brushed close to this one. These experiences may not prove anything about other universes. They may belong fully to the brain, to memory, to pattern, and to the way consciousness rehearses possibility. But they show why the idea of infinite versions feels so powerful. Long before science speaks of branches or horizons, the mind already knows how to be haunted by the lives it did not live. Chapter 13. Dreams, déjà vu, and false clues. The mind begins searching for evidence long before science gives it permission. Once the idea of other versions has entered thought, ordinary experiences can start to feel less ordinary. A dream may seem too complete, as if it belonged to another life rather than to sleep. A moment of déjà vu may arrive with the strange pressure of recognition, even when nothing about the present should be familiar. A person may enter a room, hear a sentence, see a face turned at a certain angle, and feel, for a brief instant, that this has already happened somewhere. The feeling passes quickly, but it leaves behind a residue that the imagination can easily carry toward other worlds. These experiences are real as experiences. They can be vivid, unsettling, tender, or difficult to explain from the inside. But being real as experience is not the same as being evidence of another universe. A dream of a different life does not prove that another branch has sent a message. Déjà vu does not prove that memory has crossed between realities. A sudden feeling of recognition does not mean the mind has touched an alternate self. The human brain is already capable of producing possible worlds, mistaken familiarity, emotional echoes, and entire scenes that feel meaningful before reason has had time to examine them. Sleep is one of the oldest sources of other lives. In dreams, a person can inhabit a city that has never existed, speak with someone long absent, return to a childhood house in a form it never had, or carry memories that seem to belong only to the dream itself. The sleeping mind does not merely replay the day like a recording. It recombines fragments, emotions, fears, desires, faces, places, and unfinished concerns into scenes that can feel complete while they are being lived. A dream can supply a history at the same time as it supplies the present, so that the dreamer seems to know where they are, who they are, and what has happened before, even though the whole structure may have formed only moments earlier. That capacity is enough to explain much of the feeling that dreams are glimpses into another existence. The mind can build continuity without needing an actual alternate universe. It can create the sensation of having lived in a place before. It can make a stranger feel known. It can give emotional weight to events that never occurred. It can wake with grief for a person who does not exist, or longing for a home that no waking map could locate. The feeling may be sincere, but sincerity does not decide origin. A dream can be false as a report, and still true as a feeling. Déjà vu belongs to a different family of strangeness. It is not usually a full dreamlike world, but a brief fracture in the feeling of time. The present moment appears to carry the texture of memory. Something being seen for the first time feels already seen. Something being heard feels already known. The experience is often ordinary in content, but uncanny in timing. A cup placed on a table, a sentence half spoken, light falling on a wall, a door closing softly, a person turning their head. Nothing supernatural has to happen for the moment to feel displaced. Neuroscience generally treats déjà vu as a disturbance or mismatch in familiarity and memory processing, not as evidence that time has repeated or that another branch has touched this one. The brain has systems for recognizing novelty and familiarity, and those systems can briefly misfire, overlap, or produce a sense of recognition without a matching memory. The result is a present moment wearing the feeling of the past. It can be powerful because familiarity is usually trusted. When the brain says, "This has happened before," the rest of the mind often listens before it questions. Yet the multiverse idea gives déjà vu a tempting story. If other versions exist, perhaps the feeling of having lived a moment before is a faint signal from one of them. Perhaps another branch reached the same room earlier. Perhaps a nearby version has already spoken the sentence now being heard. Perhaps consciousness, for 1 second, has brushed against its own alternate path. These thoughts are compelling because they turn an internal glitch of familiarity into a cosmic clue. They make the small strangeness meaningful on a grand scale. The difficulty is that a compelling story is not the same as evidence. A false clue can feel more intimate than a true measurement. The cosmic microwave background is impersonal and faint, yet it carries real information about the early universe. The dream of another life can feel emotionally overwhelming and still reveal nothing beyond the mind that dreamed it. Science has to prefer the faint, reliable signal over the vivid, private impression. That does not make the private impression worthless. It only keeps it in the right category. The right category may be psychological resonance. Dreams and déjà vu do not prove alternate realities, but they show why alternate realities feel so believable to human beings. The mind is already multiform. It rehearses conversations that never happen. It imagines futures that dissolve before arriving. It keeps possible selves alive in memory. The person one might have become, the answer one might have given, the home one might have built, the life one might have entered by staying, leaving, accepting, refusing, forgiving, or waiting. Long before physics speaks of branching, the mind branches in its own private way. This inner branching is not the same as physical branching. An imagined life does not become a universe because it is imagined. A memory of an unlived path is not a signal from a distant copy, but the resemblance explains the emotional force. Human consciousness is built to simulate. It does not only record the world, it models what might happen, what could have happened, what should not happen again, and what may still happen if the next choice changes. This power is useful for survival, but it also fills the mind with ghosts of possibility. A person may spend years accompanied by a version of themselves who never physically existed, the version who studied another subject, the version who answered differently, the version who moved away sooner, the version who never met a certain person, the version who was braver, softer, colder, safer, more reckless, more loved, more alone. These are not necessarily delusions, they are structures of imagination and memory built from the same life but arranged around alternate centers. The mind can carry them with surprising detail because it knows the materials from which they would have been made. In that sense, the idea of infinite yous does not enter an empty room. It enters a mind already crowded with possible selves. The scientific speculation gives outer scale to an inner habit. It says, perhaps reality itself may contain versions of what the mind has always been able to picture. Perhaps somewhere beyond the horizon or beyond interference, the imagined road is not only imagined. The danger is that the mind then begins to treat every powerful feeling as confirmation. A dream becomes evidence, a coincidence becomes a sign, a moment of familiarity becomes a message from another branch. Careful thinking has to resist that temptation. Coincidence can be meaningful to the person who experiences it without being cosmological evidence. A dream can reveal a buried fear without revealing another universe. Déjà vu can show the delicacy of memory without opening a door between worlds. The mind does not need to be dismissed in order to be kept honest. Its experiences can be honored as human experiences while still being separated from claims about the structure of reality. This separation matters because the multiverse is already difficult enough. It does not need false evidence to remain strange. Infinite space, eternal inflation, quantum branching, and observer selection are unsettling on their own terms. Adding dreams and déjà vu as proof would weaken the idea rather than strengthen it, because private impressions cannot carry the burden that physical theories require. The stronger path is quieter. The brain's strange experiences do not prove the multiverse, but they explain why the multiverse feels like something the mind has been preparing for all along. There is a tenderness in that. When a person dreams of another life, the dream may be nothing more than the nervous system arranging its fragments through sleep. Still, it can reveal what the waking self has not finished feeling. When déjà vu passes through an ordinary moment, it may be only a brief confusion of familiarity, yet it reminds the mind that the present is not always as simple as it feels. When an unlived life returns again and again in thought, it may not be evidence that another branch exists, but it shows that the self is made partly of comparison, partly of memory, and partly of the possibilities it never entered. The false clue is not useless. It points to the wrong object, but it points from a real place. Dreams of alternate lives point from longing. Déjà vu points from the instability of recognition. Regret points from the mind's ability to model another outcome. Hope points from the same ability turned forward. These experiences do not tell us that another universe has touched this one. They tell us that consciousness is already haunted by versions, remembered versions, imagined versions, feared versions, desired versions, and discarded versions that still return quietly in thought. If actual other versions exist, they remain hidden by physics, not revealed by feeling. The branch does not send a dream as a postcard. The distant duplicate does not leak memory across the cosmic horizon. The bubble universe does not press its history into a moment of déjà vu. Such images may be beautiful, but they belong to story rather than evidence. The separation between realities, if they exist, would be more complete than emotion wants it to be. The mind may sense possibility everywhere, while the universe keeps its causal walls intact. And yet the mind's false clues prepare it for the final speculative thought. If dreams can build lives that feel real for a few minutes, if memory can keep unlived paths warm for decades, if déjà vu can make the present feel borrowed from another time, then the self is already less simple than it appears. It lives not only in what happened, but also among what almost happened, what was feared, what was desired, and what could still be. The multiverse would not invent this complexity. It would place it inside a much larger architecture. The question then is not whether a dream proves another world. It does not. The question is why the thought of another world finds such easy passage through the human mind. Perhaps it is because consciousness is always making more than one version of life. It lives the actual day, remembers the lost one, anticipates the possible one, and carries faint emotional traces of all three. The brain is not a telescope pointed at parallel realities, but it is a maker of inner alternatives. That alone is enough to make the possibility of outer alternatives feel strangely familiar. When the false clues are set aside, the larger speculation remains. Not every feeling is evidence, and not every familiar strangeness is a signal, but the mind's capacity to generate other lives shows why the final possibility feels so large. Reality itself may be doing at a physical scale something the mind has always done inwardly. It may be allowing more than one history, more than one arrangement, more than one version of a life to exist somewhere within the range of what is physically possible. The dreams fade, the déjà vu passes, the private signs lose their claim as proof, and what remains is the colder possibility that no sign is needed at all. Chapter 14. The reality where everything happens. The colder possibility is that no private sign is needed at all. No dream has to cross from one branch into another. No moment of déjà vu has to be a message from a neighboring life. No strange coincidence has to be treated as evidence that another reality has brushed against this one. If the multiverse exists in one of its larger forms, it would not need to announce itself through feeling. It could remain completely silent, completely unreachable, and still contain more histories than the human mind was ever built to hold. The idea can be stated simply, though it does not remain simple for long. If reality is large enough, or branching enough, or varied enough, then every physically possible history may exist somewhere within it. Not every imagined history, not every contradiction, not every fantasy made real by desire, only what the laws, or the deeper laws behind the laws, permit. The word everything has to be held carefully. It does not mean that logic breaks. It means that, across enough regions, branches, or arrangements, possibility may be given room to become actual. This is one of the strongest differences between serious speculation and fantasy. A fantasy multiverse grants anything. A physical multiverse grants only what physics allows. A person cannot find a world where 2 and 2 make 5 in the ordinary sense, or where a body survives without any process capable of supporting life, or where a contradiction exists merely because it would make a better story. Even in the largest speculative picture, reality remains disciplined. It may be vast beyond measure, but it is not lawless. And yet what the laws allow may already be more than enough to unsettle the self. A universe like this one contains matter, stars, planets, chemistry, organisms, nervous systems, memory, language, and choice. If such a structure can occur once, and if the larger field of reality gives enough space or enough branches for variation, then similar structures may occur again. Some may be exact, some may be nearly exact, some may begin the same way and then separate. Some may never resemble this life at all, except in the broad fact that they contain observers asking their own local questions from inside their own worlds. The phrase, "everything happens," is dangerous because it can make consequence seem thinner. If every allowed path occurs somewhere, then perhaps no choice matters. But this is a mistake made by looking from too far away. A choice matters inside the history where it is made. A kindness offered here changes this chain of events, not all chains. A silence kept here leaves its mark here. A risk taken here belongs to this body, this memory, this set of people who can be affected by it. Other versions do not cancel local consequence. They only show that consequence may be distributed across a wider structure. From the outside, if such an outside could exist, the multiverse might contain many outcomes. From the inside, life remains narrow. This narrowness is not failure. It is the condition that allows experience to be experience. The mind does not live the totality. It lives one stream. It does not feel all branches at once. It feels one body, one mood, one pain, one relief, one sequence of moments becoming memory. Even if reality contains countless versions, Awareness remains local enough to make a single word matter. The reality where everything happens would therefore not feel like everything from within. It would feel like this: a room, a body, a remembered day, a decision waiting for its small place in time. The vastness behind it would remain unseen and perhaps unseeable. If another version lives differently, this version does not hear it. If another self is spared, this one does not inherit the reprieve. If another branch carries an easier future, the ease remains there. Each life is complete to itself, sealed not by insignificance, but by the simple fact that experience cannot be everywhere at once. There is a temptation to imagine the total multiverse as a grand archive, where every possible life is stored somewhere, waiting to be found. But an archive is too orderly, too human, too intentional. The larger reality, if it exists, would not be arranged for reading. It would not index the lives that almost happened. It would not preserve them for consolation. It would not place the better version within reach of the wounded one, or the wiser version within reach of the foolish one. It would allow histories to exist only because the conditions allow them, and then leave each history inside itself. In some regions, if eternal inflation is right, whole universes may have cooled out of an inflating background, each with its own inheritance of physical conditions. In some branches, if many worlds is right, quantum outcomes may continue without collapse, producing separated histories that no longer interfere. In an infinite spatial expanse, if such an expanse exists, repeated arrangements may appear beyond every horizon. These pictures are not the same, but they share a pressure on human intuition. They all loosen the assumption that reality contains only one completed version of what can happen. The self, placed inside that pressure, changes shape. It is no longer easy to think of a person as a single cosmic occurrence, placed once and never repeated in any form. The pattern might recur, the history might branch, the near life might exist elsewhere. The road not taken might be taken by another continuation. Yet the self also does not dissolve into all of these. It remains tied to continuity. It remains attached to the chain that can be remembered from within. It is local, even if the pattern from which it is made is not necessarily unique. This localness may be the only way to live honestly inside such a possibility. A person cannot care for all versions. They cannot rescue distant copies, advise branch descendants, or borrow peace from another outcome. They cannot step sideways into the life that made the other choice. They cannot collect the happiness scattered across possible worlds and pour it back into this one. The multiverse may multiply existence, but it does not give one stream of awareness ownership over the rest. Still, the thought of other versions may soften certain certainties. It may make regret less absolute without making it meaningless. It may suggest that the unchosen road, if physically realized somewhere, was not pure nothing. It may give the imagination a larger frame for why some possibilities feel so close, why the mind keeps returning to them, why a life can feel surrounded by its unlived neighbors. But it cannot prove that those neighbors exist, and it cannot turn them into shelter. The possible life remains possible, or distant, or branched, or hidden, while the actual life continues. The reality where everything happens would contain no simple moral order. It would not guarantee that every sorrow is balanced by an equal joy elsewhere. It would not mean that every injustice is corrected in another branch. It would not ensure that every love lost here is preserved somewhere in a way that can matter here. Some versions may be healed, others may be harmed. Some may never exist because their conditions never form. Some may exist only briefly. Some may resemble this life closely enough to disturb the idea of uniqueness, while others may differ so completely that no human story can hold them. This lack of order is not emptiness. It is the difference between a universe that serves meaning and a universe in which meaning appears locally. Meaning does not need to govern the whole in order to exist somewhere within it. The conversation can matter between two people even if no cosmic structure records it as central. A kindness can be real even if other branches contain cruelty. A grief can be real even if another version was spared. Local meaning is not weakened by the existence of other local meanings. It is weakened only if one demands that all of reality gather around a single life. Perhaps the most unsettling implication is that uniqueness may have been misunderstood. A life may not be unique because nothing like it exists anywhere else. It may be unique because it is this continuity, this private unfolding, this particular chain of sensation and memory. A song played twice is not the same hearing. A pattern repeated elsewhere is not the same stream of awareness. A branch descendant with the same past is not available to this body. The self may be repeated in structure and still remain unshared in experience. This makes the multiverse less like a theft of individuality and more like an expansion of solitude. There may be many versions, but each is alone in the only way consciousness can be alone. Each looks outward from a center it cannot trade. Each believes itself to be here. Each gathers its evidence locally. If all physically possible lives exist, then the universe is not empty of selves. It is crowded with interiors that cannot become one another. The idea can also make ordinary reality appear sharper. If countless versions exist, this version is not less real. It is the one whose pain can be reduced here, whose words can be chosen here, whose memories continue here, whose body carries the consequences of this chain. The larger structure may be indifferent, but indifference does not erase immediacy. A cup placed down gently, a message answered, a person forgiven, a decision delayed until wisdom returns. These acts remain small only from the viewpoint of scale. From inside a life, they are part of the architecture of the world. The reality where everything happens, if it exists, may never be confirmed in full. It may remain beyond observation, beyond experiment, beyond the reach of any signal that can return to Earth. Some parts may be constrained by theory, some may be hinted at by mathematics, some may remain forever in the territory between physics and philosophy. This does not make the thought useless, it only gives it the right weight. It is not a fact to be possessed. It is a possibility to be held carefully. And when it is held carefully, it does not say that life is meaningless, because many lives may exist. It says something quieter. It says that reality may be larger than singular experience can contain. It says that the self may not be the only expression of its pattern, while still remaining the only stream it can live. It says that what feels like the whole world from within may be one local history among many, and yet local history is the only place where love, fear, memory, and choice can take form. So the final possibility settles without needing proof from dreams, signs, or hidden messages. Somewhere beyond sight, or beyond interference, or beyond the reach of any model now complete, there may be versions of lives that resemble this one, diverge from it, or never approach it at all. Some may have taken the other road. Some may have ended earlier. Some may have continued longer. Some may be so close that only one small event has changed. And still, this life remains the one that is open here, moving through its own narrow passage of time, while the larger reality, if it is larger in this way, continues without needing to be seen. Chapter 15. The version that fell asleep after all the possible worlds have been allowed to exist in thought. Something small and immediate remains, not small in worth, but small in scale. The way every lived moment is small when placed against galaxies, branching histories, and regions of reality that may never exchange a single signal. A body rests in one place. A mind carries one chain of memory. A life continues from one breath into the next, not because the larger universe has become simple again, but because awareness has never known how to be everywhere. It arrives locally and it stays local. And from that localness, the whole feeling of being alive is made. If there are infinite versions, they do not gather into one shared mind. They do not sit together behind the surface of experience, comparing their lives. They do not lend memories to one another in the night. Each one, if such versions exist, would remain sealed inside its own continuity. One version may have taken the road that was avoided here. Another may have remained near the person who disappeared from this history. Another may have forgotten what this one still remembers. Another may have lived so similarly for so long that almost nothing would distinguish the two, until one small alteration widened quietly into another future. Yet none of them can replace the life that is actually being lived. A version elsewhere may be real, but its reality does not make this present less real. A branch may continue with another outcome, But that outcome does not undo this one. A distant copy may carry the same memories, but its remembering is not this remembering. The strange possibility of many selves does not dissolve the self into mist. It leaves the self where it has always been, inside a particular unfolding, surrounded by possibilities it cannot enter. There is a kind of calm in that, though it is not the calm of certainty. It is the calm of returning to scale. The mind can travel outward through speculation, into infinite space, into bubble universes, into quantum branches, into the hard question of why awareness is this awareness and not another. It can sit for a while beside the thought that reality may contain every physically allowed version of a life. But eventually the mind comes back to the one place from which it began. The present has not moved. The body has not multiplied from the inside. The next moment still belongs to this continuity. The multiverse, if it exists, would be too large to comfort in any simple way. It would not promise that every loss is restored in a useful place. It would not promise that every pain here is balanced by happiness elsewhere. It would not send proof through dreams, or allow branches to exchange apologies, or let one version whisper across the distance to another. It may contain lives that are kinder, and lives that are colder, and lives so different that no familiar word would hold them. But the care available here would remain here. The people reachable here would remain the ones who can be answered, helped, forgiven, remembered, or held. The life can feel diminished by the thought of copies, as if repetition would make it less precious. But repetition is not the same as replacement. A melody played again does not erase the first hearing. A pattern appearing elsewhere does not empty the pattern here, even if the universe is wide enough to contain another arrangement of matter close to this one. The stream of awareness passing through this body remains its own. Its tenderness is not borrowed. Its fatigue is not symbolic. Its memories do not become less private because some other mind, unreachable and unknown, may carry matching memories under another horizon. The same is true of branching. If many worlds is right, then other outcomes may continue, but this branch does not become a shadow because of them. The branch being lived contains its own records, its own consequences, its own local truth. A word spoken here remains spoken here. A silence kept here remains part of this history. A kindness offered here does not need to be unique across all possible realities in order to matter. It only needs to reach the person, or the animal, or the future self, or the fragile moment that exists within this chain of events. At the farthest edge of the idea, the self becomes both less absolute and more tender. Less absolute because it may not be the only possible expression of its pattern. More tender because no other expression can take over the work of living this one. A duplicate cannot breathe for this body. A branch descendant cannot repair this relationship. A happier version cannot transfer its peace into this nervous system. A wiser version cannot make the choice waiting here. The larger reality may be crowded with possibilities, but the practical world remains narrow enough for responsibility. Perhaps that narrowness is not a prison. Perhaps it is what gives experience its shape. To feel one life, the mind must not feel all lives. To remember one past, it must not inherit every past that might have formed. To love one person, it must encounter them in one history, under one set of conditions, with one body and one voice and one sequence of days that cannot be repeated from the inside. Infinite possibility may surround the actual, but the actual is where feeling becomes definite. It is where the possible stops being a cloud and becomes a life. The universe, in the part that can be measured, continues expanding. Galaxies remain gathered into clusters and filaments, while more distant regions recede beyond future contact. The old radiation from the early cosmos still fills space, cooled into a faint background, stretched by time and expansion until it becomes less like heat and more like a remaining trace. Stars form where gas gathers. Others end and return their elements to the wider medium. Planets turn around their suns. Chemistry continues its patient work in places where conditions allow it. None of this requires the universe to explain itself fully. Beyond the observable horizon, there may be more of the same. Or there may be regions whose histories can never be joined to this one. Farther still, in theory, there may be inflating domains, branch structures, mathematical possibilities, repetitions, near repetitions, and versions of lives that would feel from within as complete as this one. They may be real, or they may belong to the frontier where physics has not yet found a way to decide. The uncertainty does not need to be solved before it can be felt. It can remain in the background, large and quiet, like a boundary that is not a wall. What is known is smaller, but it is not small. A universe can be observed for billions of light years. Its early heat can be measured in old radiation. Its galaxies can be mapped, its expansion can be traced. Its matter can become stars, planets, bodies, and thoughts capable of asking whether thought is alone. The unknown does not erase this knowledge, it surrounds it. The known region remains the place where evidence has arrived, where instruments have listened, where human beings have learned to describe a cosmos far older and wider than any one life. If other selves exist, they too would belong to their own known regions. They would have their own evidence and ignorance, their own reachable people, their own versions of memory. A distant duplicate might look outward and wonder about copies beyond its horizon. A branch version might think itself singular because it has no access to the histories that no longer interfere. A near life might carry one different choice and never know what turned differently elsewhere. Each version, if real, would live under the same condition that governs this one. The totality may be vast, but experience opens only from within. There is no final need to decide whether that makes the universe more lonely or less. It may be both. Less lonely, because reality may contain more centers of awareness than one life can imagine. More lonely, because each center remains enclosed in itself, unable to exchange its inner life with the others. The multiverse, if it exists, does not abolish solitude. It enlarges the field in which solitude appears. It gives the self possible neighbors that can never knock, possible kin that can never answer, possible lives that remain complete and unreachable. And still, the life here continues. It does not need to defeat the larger possibility. It does not need to prove that it is the only one. It does not need to own every version of its pattern. It only continues, moment by moment, through the particular conditions that have carried it this far. The universe may be infinite, or branching, or multiple in ways still beyond proof. But this awareness remains attached to one body, one breath, one remembered path, one slowly changing present. The thought can now loosen. Infinite selves, if they exist, do not have to be chased through the mind. The copy beyond the horizon remains beyond the horizon. The branch that carried the other outcome remains outside contact. The universe that never allowed life remains silent without knowing it is silent. The version that chose differently goes on, if it exists, inside its own chain of days. None of them require anything from this moment. Far away, light continues its long passage through expanding space. Some of it will arrive at future instruments. Some will never arrive at any observer in this region. Galaxies already too distant will continue beyond contact, their histories real to themselves and absent here. The old radiation remains, thin and measurable, a cooled trace from an early state of the cosmos. Space does not need to answer every question placed inside it. It can continue quietly, with known laws, unknown edges, and possibilities that remain folded beyond reach. The self, too, can remain local. Among all the versions that may be imagined, among all the branches that may or may not exist, among all the distant arrangements that endless space might permit, this is the stream that is open here. It does not need to be the only possible stream in order to matter. It does not need to be repeated nowhere else in order to be real. It is real because it is being lived, because one moment gives way to the next, because memory gathers softly behind it, and because the next breath arrives only here. The larger reality, whatever its final shape, continues beyond the boundary of sight. Perhaps it contains no copies at all. Perhaps it contains more than the mind can bear to count. Perhaps it branches without end, or opens into separated regions, or remains simpler than the wildest theories suggest. The uncertainty settles without conclusion. The observable universe keeps its faint old light. The galaxies keep their distances. The body keeps its place in one small portion of time. And somewhere inside that smallness, The version that is here grows quiet, not because the question has been answered, but because not every question needs to remain awake. The possible lives recede, the branches soften into distance. The horizon remains where light has not yet arrived. Space continues outward, measured and unmeasured, known and unknown, carrying its old radiation, its silent regions, its unfinished possibilities, and this one narrow thread of awareness slowly resting inside it. The journey is complete. Rest well.